Hello and welcome to today's episode. Today we'll be talking about a game that is considered to be the greatest game of all time by many fans, along with also being the highest ranking game on Metacritic, and that is for The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Before we get into that though, we'll go over our Relay of Gaming segment where I have 7 games picked out that I've selected at random. And so I'll talk about him a bit here, and then I'll also put up some gameplay segments up on my YouTube channel and TikTok also at Arcade Amigo. And then after that, we'll go over some news, modern gaming news. So usually what I try to do here is have more of a casual conversation with things going on in the video game industry, along with going over any like somewhat more newish games that I've played. And so again, the point of this is just not that I'm trying to keep up with the latest and greatest as far as video game news goes. I do try to do my best though, but because I can only get to it once a week, I might be a bit outdated on some of the information I have. But again, the point is just more that as if you're having a casual conversation with a friend about just things going on in the video game industry. And then after that is where I'll do, again, it's a bit of a casual retrospective, a bit of a information on the game. And so again, for this week, I have selected the Ocarina of Time. And yeah, excited to get into this game here. I guess I don't know too much about the overall development of this game. And so it'll be kind of nice to go over some information on this. And also just to build up a little bit of the hype train on this, if anything, just for myself, but anybody that's willing to listen to, as we're anticipating the remake that should be coming out some point this year. We still don't have a release date on it, other than it's going to be in 2026. And Nintendo hasn't showed us more other than the quick little teaser that they showed back in their June Nintendo Direct. So we'll be, starting to get the hype train going a little bit as we're anticipating that game as well too. But let's go ahead and start getting into it here with our Relay of Gaming. So again, I have 7 games selected. And so basically what I do, I just have a bunch of games listed on an Excel sheet, and then I use a random number generator, and then just select 7 games at random. And so these are the 7 games now that I have picked for this week. So starting off with Metroid Zero Mission. And Metroid Zero Mission, it's not quite my favorite Metroid game, but it's probably the one that I've beaten the most times though. I think a part of that is just because it's really fun to play. It's something about it that it's very easy to get into. And I do like the Metroidvania aspects of it as far as exploring an area, being able to unlock new areas, and getting items that help you unlock those new areas and all. But it's fairly short though, and it's everything just feels really snappy about it. And so definitely probably one of the more funner Metroid games, even though it's not quite my favorite. But definitely up there with one of the better remakes of all time, as I feel like this is a good example of when a remake should be done, and that you take a game that had a really good foundation to it to begin with, but perhaps it's a bit outdated and all like the original Metroid is. And while that game still has its certain strengths to it, it definitely could have used been polished up some, right? As again, it came out really early in the Nintendo's lifetime, and Metroidvania games have just seen so much improvements. And so I'm glad that they redid this game and all, and definitely one of the better remakes out there. So yeah, if you're into Metroid at all or curious about the series, this is an excellent starting point, as it's pretty much the first game in the timeline as far as I know. And then also it's just really easy to get into, really fun game overall. And you can play it now on the Nintendo Switch Online also if you don't have access to like a Game Boy Advance or just not into emulation. But yeah, highly recommend you play this game. Next up is a game from the PC Engine or TurboGrafx scene, and that is for Neutopia 2. Actually, now that I think about it, I don't know if it did come out here in the United States on the TurboGrafx 16. So I guess I'll know more about it as I start gathering some information and post a gameplay segment of it. But Neutopia 2, so the first one was very reminiscent of like something like The Legend of Zelda, and this one seems to be more of the same. Again, I don't know much about this one. I'm more familiar with the first one, but everything that I've seen on it and all, it has a very similar style. So I'm going to assume it is kind of like in the style of the original Legend of Zelda on the Nintendo, and also the Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past on the Super Nintendo. Almost like it lies somewhere in between, just like it's the first part. So yeah, I mean, if it's anything as like the first one there, then this would be, I'm pretty sure, a fun action RPG that's available on the TurboGrafx 16. From what I've seen, again, the colors look really colorful and the sprites look nice. So yeah, kind of excited to check this game out and see what it's all about. And next up is one of the GOATs when it comes to beat 'em ups, and that's Streets of Rage 2. And so this game came out on the Sega Genesis, would have been around 1992, and really improved on the first part. Much better graphics, more moves, better control, and just overall just a better product overall, right? I mean, this is truly one of the best sequels out there, as far as how much it improved on the original one. And yeah, I mean, the beat 'em up action is just a lot of fun. There's what makes the Streets of Rage game stand out from the other ones is, for me, it's two things mainly that outside of just like the aesthetics of it, but it's if you're talking about gameplay, I like how in the Streets of Rage games there seems to be a bit more strategy than most other RPGs that I've played, where learning how to position your character in the right striking range, or where you're able to grab him and then body slam him, or do a variety of different moves, really just keeps you on your toes right as you're playing this game. And that's the other thing too. Also, being able to grapple the enemies is just a lot of fun. As a lot of other beat 'em ups, you can't always seem to do that. And then the other thing too is the music and the graphics are really nice as well too. The graphics are definitely some of the better on the Sega Genesis. The sprites work and the backgrounds and all, and even the color usage, really almost kind of can almost pass for a Neo Geo game at a first glance. And of course, the music is now legendary from Yuzo Koshiro. I mean, definitely one of his better soundtracks of all time. This soundtrack is just legendary, and I mean, definitely elevates the action to a new level, right? I mean, it's one thing that I think beat 'em ups really need to get right is the music. As after a while, most beat 'em ups, regardless of how good they are, can be a little monotonous. So having some good music can really help break the kind of the boredom on them. But another thing too, also that Streets of Rage 2 does really well that helps break up that boredom is the way it splits up its levels. So like there's 8 levels, I guess, but then within each one, it's broken up into different segments, and so it keeps things very fresh by introducing a new background, some new enemies, something different that's going on, right? So like for example, one stage you'll start off in a baseball stadium, and then another part of the game you're going down an elevator, where the pitcher's mound is at, and then that leads you to the very bottom where there's some kind of a underground fight club going on. And so it's all very original, keeps things fresh, and also each section doesn't stay its welcome. I feel like some beat 'em ups, it can go on and on for a while, but Streets of Rage gets it just right, where each segment it's very compact, tight, full of a lot of good gameplay, and like again, and then the music can switch up to also quite a bit, so you're getting constantly new tunes and all. And so that's one thing that I think Streets of Rage 2 did really well, and still why it's considered one of the best beat 'em ups of all time. Definitely one of the must plays on the Sega Genesis. But sticking with beat 'em ups though, the next game I have here is for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the arcade game. And so this game came out right as the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were starting to become really popular. And so this is a beat 'em up from Konami. And eventually Konami would make a lot of beat 'em ups like this, but this is the first one that they started off here with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And so this game, you control the 4 turtles, so it was a lot of fun playing in 4-player back in the day in the arcades. And you fight all the classic enemies like Rocksteady, Bebop, and such. And yeah, I mean, it's a pretty fun game. It feels a little bit basic, so like what I just said about Streets of Rage 2. This one, the moves, it just seems a little bit more limited, and as we would see in like even in its own series, right, later, like for example, Turtles in Time really expanded more on the move list and just the scenarios and whatnot. But it's still a fun game though. It's still a lot of fun to play 4-player, and so you can find this. There's a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles collection that came out a few years ago that has this game on there. So yeah, a lot of fun. And Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle beat 'em ups are always a lot of fun, especially when you play with multiplayer. And so this is kind of where it started for this series here. And next up, I have Killer Instinct Gold. And so this is specifically the one that came out on the Nintendo 64. So originally the game came out in the arcades, and then it got ported over to the 64. And there was a bit of a concern on how the 64 was going to handle it, because Killer Instinct Gold in the arcade, it has so the backgrounds are like pre-rendered backdrops, where meaning like it's streaming video, right? Which is a pretty cool effect in the arcades, but that takes a lot of memory though. And the Nintendo 64 being cartridge only, wasn't quite sure how they were going to do it. But then eventually, when the game came out, they came out with a pretty good solution where the characters are still like the pre-rendered character sprites. So kind of think of like what Donkey Kong was doing back then. Only the backgrounds now, instead of being pre-rendered like video, it's now all polygonal graphics, but it's running at 60 frames per second. And while they don't look quite as detailed, the smooth movement of them and all still makes for a pretty nice compromise. And the gameplay still really well in the Nintendo 64, although it's kind of hard to play with that Nintendo 64 pad, as just the layout of the buttons and all that doesn't make for the most intuitive, right, when it comes to fighting games. But just the game itself, though, and all is really excellent. And, just the Killer Instinct games are just a lot of fun. And trying to pull off all the ultra combos and all. And the music is pretty kick-ass, too, as well, for a cartridge. And so, yeah, just a good overall package. And more recently, you can play this game on the Nintendo 64. I'm sorry, the Nintendo 64 if you have the original cartridge, or the Nintendo 64 app if you have the Nintendo Switch Online subscription on the Switch. Or also if you're still subscribed to Game Pass, you can play it on there. The only thing about on the Xbox is I think you only can play this game if you have the Game Pass subscription, because I had it and then I had to cancel it. But then I was trying to play Killer Instinct Gold on there. Excuse me. But it wouldn't let me, though, and it doesn't seem like you can buy it either. So that was kind of weird. But another way you can play it, actually, though, now that I think about it, on the Nintendo 64, on the Microsoft Xbox, and also the Nintendo 64 version, so not just the arcade one, but on the Rare. So Rare came out with like this Rare Replays package that comes out, that's out on the Xbox, where you can play a bunch of different games from Rare on there, and it has Killer Instinct Gold on there, and again the Nintendo 64 version. So I thought that was kind of cool. All right, but next up, though, is for Deck Athlete. I think that's what the name of the game is, actually. So this is a interesting game. It was a sports game on the Sega Saturn, and so it's like a track and field game where you have some events that you can partake in, so like running, jumping, and such. And what made this game stand out, though, was for the Sega Saturn, it's actually pretty impressive graphics-wise. It's running at a smooth 60 frames per second, and the character models are fairly detailed, again, for being on the Saturn. And also, it was using the Saturn's high-res mode, so only a handful of games took advantage of this, with probably the more prominent one being Virtua Fighter 2, where basically the characters, if I recall right, the character models and the texture work and all was running at 480p, which was pretty high for back in the fifth generation, and so definitely makes the character model stand out on this. But other than that, it's a track and field game. So I mean, it's a big button masher where you just got to smash the buttons right to go faster or jump farther, and depending on the event that you're choosing. So as far as games on the Saturn, it was considered to be one of the better sports games on there. And so it's a bit of a looker for the system, and just pretty fun for what it is. So I would say if you have any interest in like track and field games, this is probably one of the better ones that's out there. But the only way I can think of playing this, though, is through either you have the original game on the Saturn or through emulation. And last up here is this is an old school classic, one of the first video games I actually ever played. I have a lot of fondness for this game here, and that's Casey's Crazy Chase. So Casey's Crazy Chase, I forgot who developed it, but originally they came out with a game called Casey Munchkin, I believe is what it was called. And it came out on the Magnavox Odyssey 2. So we're going way back on this one. But because the game was very similar to Pac-Man, there was a bit of a lawsuit that happened where they had to pull this game off the shelf. And so they came out eventually with this game here, Casey's Crazy Chase, which is still kind of like Pac-Man, only its own variation on it, where instead of being chased by ghosts around the maze, and you're now you're still like this fuzzy little character, but there's still like these ghost kind of things that are going around the maze. But now there's like this Pac-Man looking character that has like these energy balls behind it, almost like a kind of like a worm or a snake, and so you have to chase it around, and then this is going to sound funny, but gobbled the balls behind them, and that's how you win, right? So they changed up the formula on it, probably to get away from another lawsuit. But I actually prefer this game over Pac-Man. Maybe it's nostalgia talking. Again, this is one of the first video games that I ever played, and just thought it was a lot of fun back then. But definitely, I mean, if you are into trying to seek out the Magnavox Odyssey 2 library of games, I would. This is probably one of the better ones on there, and or whether you're emulating it either way. But yeah, just a lot of fun though. Let's now get into it though with modern gaming news. And oh man, I try to keep up with as much as I can. If you've been following any kind of video game discourse, there's a lot going on right now, right? Uh, a lot of people are pretty much citing that this is a form of a video game crash, and I think it really is. I mean, it's different, right, than what happened back in 1983, but it's definitely also even potentially worse, right, with everything going on. And perhaps it's I think I talked about it a few episodes back, where perhaps it's needed though, right? I mean, we'll see. Ultimately, we have to see how this all plays out, but um it's a rough way to go about it. There's a I mean, there was definitely a lot of unfortunate things that happen, right, to get us to this point. But you know, it is something that I feel in some cases does have to happen. I'm kind of talking more about on the Xbox side of things, but there's also some horrible things that are happening, right, more on the PlayStation side of things that shouldn't be happening. But yeah, we'll kind of go into it there here. But first off, before we get into that old mess, though, I want to talk a little bit about some games that I've been playing, and these are so again somewhat more modernish. But this past week, my wife and I beat the Split Fiction game, and that's a really good game. Was impressed with that game. The last part of the game, so I would say like the lead up to the last boss, and then the last boss itself, and all, and even the ending was really creative and excellent. I was surprised of just how clever that game is. Definitely, if you're looking for something or some game to play right multiplayer, these games from Hazel Light or Joseph Fares, right, the creator of these games, they're truly outstanding. So because we beat Split Fiction. Now I played the last portion of the game right with my wife, and then prior to that, I would play it here and there with her or my daughter. But the majority of the game, actually, my wife and my daughter played it. So there's a lot that I missed out on the game. But from what I saw, it's pretty great. I'm a big fan of that game. I think it's really excellent, and some of the scenarios that you do are really clever, really creative, and again, because it blends the two things that I really like a cyberpunk setting mixed in with like a high fantasy setting, it really spoke to me in that way. And the story, from what I could tell, again, I didn't see the whole game, but it seems like to be at least the way it ended and all was pretty good, a little heartfelt, right, and just overall, just seems like it has a good plot. So it was funny because so we beat that game. And then the next day I was at work and my wife stayed home. She had her day off, and then my daughter were playing that game, and they ended up beating It Takes Two. So we've been slowly working through that game, but then they ended up beating that game. So I didn't get to see the ending on that there though. But my wife and I plan playing the last section there for a bit here soon. But then afterwards, I was like, well, let's try this Brothers game out. So it's called Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons. That game came out, I don't know, 2016 or 15 or so. It's a bit older, but I remember playing it a while back, and I kind of liked it. It's where it's the way I was playing it though. It has an interesting control scheme where you're moving one brother with the left analog stick, and then the other brother with the right analog stick, and then using the trigger buttons for one per brother, right, to do a certain command. And I thought it was actually pretty clever playing it one player. But I had gotten to the game on the Switch a while back, and so we played through that game. I was like, well, let's check this game out. And the game, it's a little. I noticed a lot of graphical glitches on the Switch. I don't know if it's like that on the other consoles, but and we were playing the original one, right? There was a remake that came out later, but we're still playing the original one. But it had a two-player mode on it, so my wife and I started playing it. And at first I was like, it's a little janky, right, compared to like their more newer games. But we still ended up getting really caught up in it, as the game is actually very creative. It's a bit dark too, also. And we ended up beating it in one sitting because it only took us about, I don't know, 2 hours and a half or so to beat. And yeah, that's a really good game too. Also, a really nice story to it, and um, again, a bit very heartfelt too, also. And yeah, so I was like, okay, I can see why this game was praised a lot back when it came out. And so yeah, so far the games that we've been from them we've really gotten into. So now we just have the a way out. The game where you're playing as two prisoners and trying to escape from prison. And so my wife and I really wanted to try to check that game out at some point. So maybe here soon we can play it. But yeah, I mean, check these games out. Like I said, if you're into multiplayer games and you have someone that you can play with, definitely a lot of fun. Mm. But then I've also just started getting into. So this is a fan made game, but I think it's one that should really be played by a lot of people, and it's called AM2R, and so that stands for Another Metroid 2 Remake. If you don't know what this is, so many years ago, so it actually would have been around 2006 or so. There was this one dude that started working on this game. I think him and maybe a few other people. And because after Metroid Zero Mission came out, right, where they redid Metroid, the first Metroid game, there was a lot of fans that came out and they were redoing Metroid 2, Return of Samus. And that game was the one that was on the Game Boy only, and so it's a bit rough around the edges, right? Because it was on the Metroidvania games hadn't still really found their footing, and it was on the Game Boy too, so it was a bit limited on just what it can do. But it was an interesting concept where you're basically going into this. I forgot the name of the planet, but SR338 or something like that, and you're basically there just to exterminate all Metroids on there. So the original Game Boy one had an interesting concept to it, just really limited by the system it was on. So then, from what I understand, after Zero Mission came out, there was a lot of fans that were doing their own interpretation of a remake of some sort of Metroid 2. So it seems like there was a lot of them. And so that's why this dude specifically named his version AM2R. So, like, oh, another Metroid 2 remake. So almost like a bit of humor on it. But this one, it took about 10 years for him to complete. Again, it's just one dude, right? And again, maybe someone else was helping him. But and so finally, when the game came out in 2016, people that got to play it, because when he uploaded it online, they were like, "Wow, this is really good! Like this is a really good game." Sure enough, though, Nintendo immediately, I think like the next day or so, sent him a cease and desist letter, or basically took some kind of legal action, right? So he had to take it down. But because it got posted on the internet, it's still out there, and because and I mean, Nintendo was going to do that anyways. But also another big motivator for them to have done it is because the following year, in 2017, we got Metroid Samus Returns, right, which was their own version of a remake, right, for Metroid 2. And that version there, that's on the Nintendo 3DS, it's pretty good. I beat it last year, and it's pretty good. I like it. Right, it was basically sort of like the foundation for what Metroid Dread would become, right, on the Switch. And Metroid Dread is excellent. So so yeah, so the official version that came out, it's a pretty good game overall. I gotta say though that from what I've been playing though of AM2R, I think I prefer this version more, because this version plays a lot like Zero Mission. It's got the pixel art style, and so for me personally, I just feel like the controls and everything just feel more responsive. It just feels better to control. And again, Metroid Samus Returns it plays fine, but something about this one though, I just prefer it. And also, I feel like as at least up to the point where I'm at, because I played it quite a bit yesterday, and I got up to I think I'm like 33% done with the game, and I feel like the flow of the game is a lot better. Where I felt that the 3DS remake had a lot of bloat to it, right? Like there's some segments that I just feel like overstayed their welcome a lot, and so because of that, I think I prefer this AM2R version. I mean, and that's because I downloaded a version that is not like the most updated version. So basically, what happened was uh, they put out the game, and then I think that they made one update to it where it nerfed one of the enemies and maybe some other things, and then after that, before they had to take it down. So afterwards, there's been the modding community or just people in the Metroid community. They've been able to do a lot of updates to it. So I didn't play the game with all the updates and mods on it. I just played kind of like the a narrator version. But even that version there, it's really polished so far from what I've played. I mean, it feels like an official release. It really does. And so don't think just because it's a fan made game that like it's not that great or it's not that polished. No, that could be further from the truth. It's really well done. And if you're still a little bit on the fence about it, if you're not too much into like fan made games, this dude is a professional, right? I forgot his name, but the guy that made this game, I mean, so much so that the I think it's High Moon Studios, so the team behind the Orion, the Will of the Wisp game, they hired this dude to be a level designer on that game there. I don't know what he's doing now, but so just so you know, right? This dude knows how to make games, and definitely check it out. I played it on my Odin 2, So you can play it on Windows. I believe you can play it on Linux systems as well, and also Android. So you'll just have to Google right how to find it. But I'll just say that on Android, whether if you're playing on your phone or like an Android device, because if you Google it, you'll find a lot of ways on how to play the game that gives you like all these complicated steps. If you just want to play like the more basic version that I have, which is still the full game, right? It's just probably not going to have like all these updated mods and perhaps some gameplay tweaks here and there, but it still plays really well. There's just a simple APK file that you can download, and it plays just fine, right? So just FYI as you're doing your search on that. All right, but let's get into it now, though, with some of the news, though, stuff that came out. And so, we had some casualties in the gaming industry as far as like video games they're pulling the plug on. And the first one here is for Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis. So this is a mobile game that is getting shut down. Um, I never played this game. My understanding, it's a mobile game that was that's it's like a basically almost like another remake of Final Fantasy VII. But yeah, they're shutting it off though. So let's just read. I never played this and all, but again, it's just things we've been talking about, right, on how they're pulling the plug on a lot of these games. But let's see. Let's read a story here from Kotaku. So Square Enix kills ambitious Final Fantasy VII mobile spin-off right before the remake trilogy's last game. So Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis will shut down this October. Square Enix announced that Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis, a gacha game that incorporated stories from across the greater Final Fantasy VII series, will shut down later this year. In a post on the Ever Crisis website, game producer Shoichi Ichikawa was surprisingly candid about the reason for the game's shutdown. It has become difficult to find a balance between production costs and the demand for character weapons and gear. He said players will have a few more months to enjoy the games before Square Enix shuts the servers down on October 6th. Ever Crisis was launched in 2023 on mobile and PC with a simplified version on the original Final Fantasy VII's combat. Ever Crisis was more than just a straight up retelling of the Time Cloud and a couple of his situation ships banded together to stop another one of his situation ships from blowing up the planet. Ever Crisis also incorporated new stories and new characters, some of whom found their way into the Final Fantasy VII Remake series, fleshed out Sephiroth's backstory more, and also put the whole Final Fantasy VII crew in weird but fun alternative universe storylines, like the one time where they were all in high school. Ever Crisis also won't be the first time Square Enix has spun up and then shut down a Final Fantasy VII mobile title within a couple of years. The company tried its hand at getting into the Battle Royale craze several years too late with Final Fantasy VII The First Soldier. After launching in 2021, Square shut that game down 2 years later. But like an agave plant in the death bloom, Ever Crisis development team isn't done with the game just yet. The developers plan to release a ton of content in the game's last days, including a rerunning past events and serving up a final chapter that producer Ichikawa says will send the game off in style. So yeah, and so that's the reason he gave, right, to as to why they're shutting it down. I kind of wonder though, there's been like it's funny because the Final Fantasy VII discourse, it's kind of crazy, right? It's the fans of Final Fantasy VII are pretty hardcore, right? And they're going to defend it to no end. I myself, I mean, I love Final Fantasy VII. It's my favorite game of all time, and I'm really loving the remake trilogy, both the original and the remake trilogy. Right? They have their flaws for sure, right? But I just think that they're outstanding games. But the discourse around Final Fantasy VII has gotten really crazy, and it's almost like and a lot of it honestly has to be with like the hardcore fans, from what I can tell, that they'll just very aggressively defend this game and the trilogy, right? Like if you say anything bad about it and all, it's bad. It's funny because there's like these two YouTube creators that I follow them, and it's just been kind of funny seeing the discourse around Final Fantasy VII because one of them, it's highly supports Final Fantasy VII, right? He's a big fan of it, so I would say almost like him and I seem to have like kind of a similar passion for this game, and that's with this Maximilian dude guy. And then also on the other end, though, this guy that's been getting a lot of fame, his name is Sebi Wez, I think. And so he makes a lot of videos that basically pointing out on how Final Fantasy Remake kind of betrays the original. And so I've seen a lot of his videos, and the dude has a point on a lot of things, right? But I mean, like I said, ultimately, I really enjoy the game. but the discourse around this game though has been really a lot. It's been a lot, right? And so I think when it comes down to it, I mean, ultimately you like what you like, right? But when it comes to the actual sales figure numbers, right, and that's where it is a bit concerning as far as, well, I mean, ultimately Part 3 is going to come out, right? So I guess ultimately, if the majority consensus is that a lot of people didn't like it, then I mean, it is what it is. I mean, it's I can kind of understand why to an extent, also too. But yeah, but it seems like Final Fantasy VII just maybe isn't as popular as a lot of people would like to believe. Like I said, I love the original, and the original was very successful and very popular. The remake trilogy, though, last I checked, the trailer to Final Fantasy VII Revelation, which I think was amazing, right? Again, I'm blown away by it. I'm like, oh, this looks so cool. Last I checked, it hasn't hit 1 million views. So meaning that yes, the game has a lot of fans to it and all, but perhaps the overall, when it comes down to it, and the raw numbers, right? Like how many people like this game, the sales numbers don't quite reflect that. I don't know how much of that, and again, as far as sales wise goes, and then, now that it went multi-platform, I don't know if those numbers have come out yet. But it does kind of seem that, while Final Fantasy VII definitely has its fans, and it's a pretty big property still, just even the Final Fantasy VII on its own, right? Not taking into account all of Final Fantasy. But I do feel, though, that I don't think it has the overall love and popularity of the original Final Fantasy VII. And perhaps, with everything that they've been doing with this particular game and spinning it off into these gotcha games and whatnot, and even the remake trilogy and all, I think perhaps it's just not quite as good as Square thinks it is, as far as for the general population. And I mean, which, I mean, it is what it is, right? We're getting the third game eventually, no matter what. I mean, the game is coming out, and so regardless of whatever the I guess the overall consensus is of the game, the games will be out there, and I just hope that they stick to landing with the third one. But I do feel that the remake trilogy is becoming a bit more of a niche, sort of like uh, love letter to fans of the series, right? And that specifically still enjoyed what the remake trilogy is doing, because there is also, there's definitely a lot of people that enjoyed the original one but do not like this remake series, right? But there's also a lot of people that do like it. But I think that the overall number of people that do like it, it's not like a like as big as I guess it seems like it could be. Had SquareSoft, or I'm sorry, Square Enix done a more traditional remake, would that have changed things? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I can't say for sure, actually. But I don't know. It's interesting, though, the discourse around it, because I can kind of see both sides. And I mean, like I said, ultimately, regardless of whatever the discourse is, I absolutely love the game, and I love the trilogy and all, or the remake trilogy. I cannot wait for Final Fantasy VII Revelation and all. But when it comes down to it and all, regardless of how Revelation ends, I don't think that this series is going to have a big lasting power like the way the original one did. And then just with them shutting this game down too, also, I just feel like maybe the name of Final Fantasy VII isn't quite as big as maybe Square Enix thinks it is, or a lot of fans think it is. I don't know. Or maybe Revelation will do really great, right? Because again, with the open world exploration that we're supposed to do in it with the high wind and all, I mean, that seems to be also very captivating for a lot of people. That it's the last one in the trilogy, that it's going to be multi-platform and all. I mean, everything is there, right, for this game to succeed as much as it possibly can. It's just going to come down to it, right? If it really wins over, people that perhaps aren't quite into it, for what's already been done with remake and rebirth. But we'll see, right? But either way, though, the Final Fantasy VII discourse is kind of crazy. If you don't know anything about it, right, just look up these two creators, right? So that way you can hear both perspectives. You get one dude, Maximilian dude, who's absolutely passionate about Final Fantasy VII, and I love a lot of his takes. And he's just it's a good channel to watch. I enjoy his YouTube channel. I like a lot of his takes on his stuff, even when he's not always right. I mean, it's a lot of fun, right? I think he has a very good way of communicating with his audience and all. And he has a good channel overall, and also amongst other things. This other dude, Sebi Wes, he's kind of funny, and And he's coming from someone that really liked the original Final Fantasy VII, but does not like the remake, right? And so he has a lot of videos as far as like pointing out differences between the original and the new one, and how they, in his opinion, right, kind of bastardized the original one. And he has there is a lot of points that he makes on there, right, where some of the things that I've even alluded to that in the remake trilogy, some things can come across a bit cringe. Um, but when I played the original one, though, right, fairly recently again, I still love it. I think it's an excellent game. It also has those moments too, right? So, but perhaps when you're seeing it more in, improved graphics and all that, it doesn't. Maybe the kind of like the sense of humor doesn't land as well, because I do see that in some areas, right? But but ultimately, like I said, the good far outweighs the bad, right? For my opinion on it. But but it's just interesting, right? Seeing the two different discourses on it, and in a way, it's a little heartbreaking for me, just because I absolutely love this game and series and all. All right, and that it's not as beloved as the original one is. It's it's kind of like, oh dang it, that it's not. You know, I wish that it would just been more beloved by a lot of people, but at the same time, I mean, if a good product, if it's universally good, then then people will show up for it, right? But if it is a bit divisive, then well, it's just that it's a bit divisive. But anyway, just some thoughts there on Final Fantasy VII. Just something that I was thinking about right as I saw this game get shut down. But speaking of still sticking with Final Fantasy VII Revelation, though, so Cody Christian and Britt Baron, I think is the actress's name from that plays Tifa, and Cody Christian, the dude that plays Cloud. So they recently had they were at some kind of a convention and speaking to their fans, and it was just the two of them. And they had some interesting things to say. Let me pull it up here. All right, so let's see. So this is something that he mentioned on there. So this is a quote from Cody Christian. So there's so much emotionality. There's so much vulnerability. There are moments in this game you have if you haven't cried in the first two yet, I guarantee you'll be sobbing in this third one. It's a payoff. So I'm thinking that he's probably so much of this game. Spoiler, right, for anybody on this, but I'll just say the certain live stream moment between Cloud and Tifa. And it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. I think that's actually one of the scenes that I'm most excited for, to see how they pull it off, even more so than some of like the grander scale stuff. But yeah, that I mean, as a fan, right, of the trilogy and all that, that really has me hyped, right, to see what it's all about. So yeah, just getting more and more excited for that game there. Let's see, but let's switch gears now though to over to Rockstar and Grand Theft Auto 6. And so here's a story that came out. I don't. Let's see. I guess we'll find out here while I'm reading the story. But I don't know if this is due to the backlash that Sony's been getting because of the announcement that they made about ending physical games. But this is coming from NeoGAF.com. So let's see. Oops, I have so many damn ads on these websites now. But let's see. So Rockstar reportedly told Sony to remove Grand Theft Auto 6 branding from the PlayStation app. So again, this story was from last Saturday, so this story is already a bit old. But so Rockstar reportedly told Sony to remove Grand Theft Auto 6 branding from the PlayStation app after the disc controversy got too hot. Sony killed physical discs for all PlayStation games starting January 2028. The backlash was instant. Politicians calling for regulations, KFC and Domino's publicly roasting them. The internet turned on Sony overnight, and so we'll have more to discuss on that also, because that's been an ongoing story that I don't think I've ever seen so much backlash. But anyways, so a week ago, Sony had GTA 6 everywhere. App icon changed. So yeah, so on the app icon, it had kind of like these sort of like neon kind of pink colors. So and then it had like a little palm tree in the background and all. But they removed that. And so the PlayStation 5 dashboard taken over, stores completely redesigned. No PlayStation game has ever gotten that treatment. Now all of it is quietly gone. When Rockstar doesn't want to be associated with your decisions, you know it's bad. Um, so yeah, I mean that's the story, anyways. That's going on. I haven't read more on it, but that seems to be the case, right? That PlayStation is still going to be the place where that game sells the most. But I think they're just trying to get away because Grand Theft Auto 6 already got a bit of backlash, right, from their own decisions on not releasing a physical game, and then Sony doing that. I mean, it's a lot of heat around it. This game is still going to sell incredibly well. I think that the digital games are still going to sell pretty well on the Sony PlayStation, games themselves. So I don't know how much of a dent it's going to make, right, with all this backlash, and we'll get into that a little bit more here in a bit. But it'll be interesting though to see if it's enough though, right? Then all that maybe makes these companies reconsider, but we'll see. But let's get into some Nintendo stuff first, though, before we get into the more kind of dour stuff. But Nintendo Switch Online got some games that were announced. I think actually they're out already. I didn't quite see, but it's some oddball games and all. But that's fine. Again, ultimately, it just gets people to try some more stuff. But so these are three Game Boy games and one Game Boy Advance game. So for the Game Boy, it's two games that I've never heard about, but one is called Fortified Zone. It's a game from Jaleco. Seems to be, I don't know, has like an army dude in the front, kind of like Rambo-ish style, and with looks like a female warrior too. So I don't know, running gun game maybe, I don't know. And then there's Sword of Hope 2. I didn't even know there was a Sword of Hope Part 1. So I don't know, maybe some kind of action RPG of some sort. And then also Wario Land. The pic that I took it's not that clear, so I don't know what the subtitle is. But those games are on the Game Boy, and then for the Game Boy Advance, so it's like a 2-pack game where it's Dr. Mario and then also Puzzle League, and so that one is available there if you have the expansion pass or so the first two Game Boy games if you have the basic tier, right, of the Nintendo Online subscription, and then the Game Boy Advance one is if you have the expansion pack. So for what it's worth, right, pretty cool. But a bit of a downer, though, is Mario Kart Tour is getting shut down. Let's see. So I saved the link on this as well, too. So let's read this here. So another kind of like online game, right, that's getting shut down. So Nintendo has announced that the mobile app Mario Kart Tour is officially coming to an end later this year, with online services closing on the 30th of September at 7 a.m. Let's see. BST time. What is BST? I forget. But anyways, so unlike Animal Crossing Pocket Champ, which shut up shop back in 2024, only to be replaced by a paid offline version, Nintendo states that a similar deal for MKT is not scheduled for release at this time of writing. The closure announcement was shared on the Nintendo Kart Tour website, where Nintendo thanked fans for playing over the years. We sincerely thank the many players who have loved and supported the game since the service began so long ago. All automatic Gold Pass subscription renewals were canceled during the MKT maintenance last night on the 7th of July. Those whose Gold Pass memberships extended beyond the service date, beyond this date, will still have access to all the benefits for free until the closure, while those without a membership will have to wait until the start of the vacation tour on 4th of August to get all the free bonuses. Excuse me. Likewise, all Ruby sales have now ended in the app, though you can still use the purchasable currency in the Spotlight Shop, Me Racing Suit Shop, and Coin Rush until those games come to a close in September. The mobile app first arrived on the scene back in 2019 and received 4 years of new content updates, including many new circuits that eventually found their way to the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pack. Before that too came to an end in 2023. Things were capped off last year with a limited Mario Kart World themed in-app event. So in absence of an online version, it looks like we've got little under 3 months left to play the mobile racer. So yeah, I had almost forgotten that this was a thing, but people, I saw a lot of expressions online on this, and I mean, people seem to really have enjoyed it. So kind of a bummer, right? We're losing another game there. But another story that had come out, and this I didn't save more detailed information on it, so I'll just go over here what I saw or heard. But this could be nothing, but it could be something, right, that potentially could affect what the Zelda Ocarina of Time remake game is going to be. So what I understand of the story is, so it's an online store called Play Asia that they sell some physical disc games on there. My understanding of it, and so they listed for pre-order the Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. They have it listed though, from what I understand, $60 US though. So initially it's like, oh, $60. I mean, not bad, right? I mean, considering that games are approaching, that they're 70 or $80, right? So $60, I mean, that seems like cool, right? If that's true. The concern though is that Nintendo has this weird way of this weird kind of price structuring, the way they've been doing their games, which I don't know, it's not always consistent and all, so it's a little weird. But basically, from at least from what Doug Bowser had said before and all, is that they're pricing their games based off of like the overall, I guess you can say, like content to the game, or just the value that people are getting for it, right? So, for example, Star Fox was only $50, where like something like Mario Kart World was like $80. You know, I think that is Mario Kart World is way too expensive, but I think in their eyes, maybe because they were thinking that was a game that's going to have a lot of value to it, meaning that people are going to keep playing it over and over and over again. That wasn't necessarily the case. It's one of the weaker Mario Kart games out there, from my understanding. I like it personally, but people that are really into that series, they seem to have a lot of criticisms against it. But again, in their eyes, they're thinking it's an $80 game because of the content in it. Was the replayability also. Uh, the Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave, $80. That's expensive, but I guess you can look at it like, it's probably going to be a long game with a lot of content to it, right? And so again, it kind of seems like Nintendo's alluding to the cheaper the game is because it's not quite as much content to it, where the more expensive it is has more content or more replayability value. So Star Fox, using Star Fox as an example, right? So it's only $50. Once you start playing the game, and I'm almost beat at least one. Um, there's different paths you can take in the game, right? And I'm almost done with like taking one path. But yeah, I mean, from it's pretty much very close to Star Fox 64, which is, I mean, it's not a bad thing. The game is great, I mean, if considering that it's a remake and all, it's still pretty great. And but I guess you could say it is short on content, right? So it's $50. So with the Legend of Zelda being $60, does that mean that it's going to be more in line with just a one-on-one remake, kind of the way Star Fox is to Star Fox 64? Because if you're only selling it for $60, and again, I don't think anybody's complaining about the price, that it would, if it would cost that. It's just that if you are selling it at that price, is this going to be more of a bare bones game than maybe we were initially thinking? Because the way they showed the trailer and all that they showed, it would kind of lead you to believe that perhaps it's going to be a much more fleshed out game. But if that's the case, it'd be hard to think that Nintendo would only sell it for $60. And so, so that's sort of the concern right there, right? Is this just going to be a very basic poor, remake? And so I guess we'll see, right? We don't have enough information, I feel, to go off of this. That posting there could just be a placeholder. There could be a lot of other factors, right? That might not necessarily be the case. I don't know. I mean, originally I was thinking that it was going to be a pretty fleshed out remake, but I don't know now. I'm wondering if, I mean, I don't know. I have no idea, right? But I'm kind of starting to think also, right, that perhaps this game isn't going to be quite as like like a really expansive remake as maybe we were thinking. The main thing that I'm going off of this is, well, first of all, this posting, right? If it ends up holding true, right? Again, we don't know for sure, but let's just say, like, if it does end up holding true, that it's only going to be $60. And then when you look at the game, like that quick little shot that they show of Link just kind of resting there, I mean, that seems like pretty high fidelity graphics, right? So I'm thinking, if they were to try to do a really expansive remake with those kind of graphics on the Switch too, I don't know if that they can pull that off, or I don't know if that's what they're going for. Um, I mean, I don't know. Because as I start thinking about it more, right? It's like Star Fox has really nice graphics on it. They really improved it, right? I mean, it looks nice, but it is just kind of more of a one-on-one remake of the original one. So, meaning that you could probably do these nice graphics when the overall scope of the game isn't as grand as something like you would think of like a modern game now. And that's why I'm kind of thinking now, is like, I don't know if they can do that level of like graphics from what, again, what my imagination goes, what this game could look like if the game is really expanded upon a lot more, right? Like you have this crazy open world now. A lot more in the dungeons are really expanded on more and just all that. I was like, I don't know if they can pull that all off at that level of graphic fidelity. And again, I'm just speculating. um I'm kind of, I don't know, I'm going to change my mind on this a little bit, and I could be completely wrong, but I want to say that I think this is going to be a little bit more of a, maybe not a one-on-one remake. I think there'll be some changes. There'll be, obviously, right? But I don't think it's going to be quite as expansive as like they're really changing up the formula of the game and all. I don't know. I could be wrong, but that's what I'm going to guesstimate for now. But we'll see. So that leads also to another story, right? That we were that this goes into as far as when we will see this game, right? When we will know more about it. So let's see. I'm pretty sure I saved something here. Okay. So this is coming from Attack of the Backlog and Nash Weedle. So from what I understand, Attack of the Backlog, it's like some kind of a podcast, and then they've gotten some stuff right, they've gotten some stuff wrong. Nash Weedle seems to be someone that gets a lot of things wrong, but he's gotten some stuff right too. So again, it's this is not 100% for sure, right? This is just some of the information that they were stating in their podcast fairly recently. So let's see. So in the recent podcast of Attack of the Backlog and Ash Weedle, they revisited their expectation regarding Nintendo's next announcement and imagined that Zelda's 40th anniversary might be celebrated in the same way as Mario's in 2025. Nash affirms that we'll have to wait until September for news on Zelda Ocarina of Time. Nash imagines, instead of a general direct in September with a segment on Zelda, like what we had for Mario's 40th anniversary last year, rather than an exclusive direct for Ocarina of Time. A teaser for the movie might be shown shortly before the Nintendo Direct. The Zelda movie might unveil its full length trailer in the Nintendo Direct alongside Ocarina of Time without stealing its spotlight, since the teaser will already have been shown beforehand. Nash has the feeling that Zelda Ocarina of Time might release in the first week of December. The next 2D Zelda game shouldn't be revealed this year, but rather in 2027, along with the movie. So that's what they're saying, right? That it could be actually until the direct of September, which, I mean, that seems to make sense and all. A lot of people were kind of thinking that it was going to be in August, because that's sort of like a month that's kind of free, right? Where they don't have a whole lot going on that month. But like, I mean, it seems like it wouldn't be in July, but I don't know. We'll see. I would say that by September we have to know what's going on with this game, right? I mean, if you're, because if it does release this year, I mean, you're already cut as of this date right now. You're already cutting it close without not really providing much information on it. So you got to show something on it. But that's the story going around right now, and so hopefully they'll have something to show here soon. But on that note as well, too, speaking of remakes, so they, I think it was also in this podcast that they were also talking about, or maybe somewhere else. I didn't get this part of full information, but I kept seeing it on my YouTube algorithm that a lot of videos about people still talking about Metroid, the Super Metroid remake. So we talked about it last episode about Metroid Ravenous, and there seems to be more and more info out there that's coming out, right? That, or at least from whatever people are alluding to and all, that Super Metroid remake is a thing, and people are still kind of talking about that it could be like a 2D pixel art style. So I've been playing. So again, I'm going back to this AM2R game that I've been playing, and so because that game is presented like in widescreen, everything looks really crisp on there and all. And so I started thinking, I was like, if Super Metroid does something like this, right? Stick to the mainly the same formula, but do give like a widescreen support. Uh, Maybe polish up the controls a little bit and all. Maybe make it more in line with like modern Metroid games. So, for example, the jumping in Super Metroid is a bit floaty. Maybe fix that where it's more snappier and like the way it is in like Metroid Zero Mission or this AM2R game, or in Metroid Fusion as well too. And not much else though, right? I keep seeing like these comparisons about that, how like Super Metroid is not needed anymore because Super Metroid Dread exists. It's like no, 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 not. I mean, not in my opinion. Super Metroid is still outstanding, right? And if they can just kind of clean up the game a little bit, right? I'd be happy with that right there, right? And again, I think in that this AM2R game that I'm playing is sort of a template of what they could do if they stick to like this some kind of still retaining the pixel art style, right? But a remake of some sort is I'm using that sort of as a kind of like as a blueprint from what I hope it would eventually end up being. But we'll still see. It's um yeah. I mean, we'll just have to wait and see on that one. All right, but let's get out of Nintendo news here and let's jump over to Xbox. And Xbox has, well, there's a lot going on with Xbox. But let's a little bit of somewhat good news, though. So this is according to, now this is going to tie into the next story here. But so for this one here, oh, Jesus Christ, these ads, so many ads. Okay, so this is an article from Bloomberg. But Microsoft's Xbox to shift Obsidian Studio to a new Fallout game. Uh, the hell? Ah, geez, I'm not even trying to fight with these ads on this website. But basically, Fallout is being fast tracked now from Obsidian Studios. So Obsidian Studios are the company that they've had a decent output of games, right? So a lot of the Microsoft studios, well, that are under the that banner there, there's been a really slow output of games from them. But Obsidian Studios, they've been doing a lot of stuff. Like they did Avowed recently. They did the Outer Worlds 2 very recently that came out. They did that Pendulum game, I think is what it's called. And I think something else. And this is all within the past 5 or 6 years or so. So they've been busy, right? And I know Avowed didn't really get quite the recognition that maybe they would have hoped for, but I still feel that they could be a talented studio. And so it looks like they're really trying to fast track to make another Fallout game, as it seems like this is going to lead into the next story, but it looks like Microsoft is really trying to put a lot of emphasis on some of their more killer app IPs, right? Like Fallout, The Elder Scrolls, Doom and all. And speaking of the Elder Scrolls, the story just kind of broke out yesterday, but it looks, from what it seems like, is that the game is. I don't know where the news story broke out from, but people are speculating that it's going to be probably another 2 to 3 years or so until we see that game, which I was already kind of thinking of anyways. But it seems to be more and more confirmed that that's the case, and so yeah, I mean, I mean, at this point, it's like, I guess if it comes out, great. If not, then whatever, right? I got my backlog of games. I still haven't beaten Skyrim or even Oblivion, right? So I'm not too um, bummed out by that news. But it's just, again, right, just everything that's been going on, and so yeah, yeah, that's going to lead into this next story. And that next story is for the Xbox bloodbath that was expected. So I'm a little late to the story here, but yeah. So on July 6th, Xbox came out and Asha Sharma and made a statement as far as what exactly is happening with the expected layoffs and potential studio closures and all. So I'll run through it here as much as I can. Again, I was trying to keep up with the story as much as possible, so some of the things I might be a bit outdated on or might not have my facts all the way correct. But starting off here, we're going to read the statement that was posted. It's a bit lengthy, but I feel like it covers a lot of just where Xbox was at. I mean, I think a lot of us already knew that they weren't in a very healthy spot financially. And again, I mean, you can place the blame on whoever you wish, right? But if you're going back to like Phil Spencer or even going before that, because again, I've talked about it before where, I mean, it was Xbox 360 era. They had a really strong start, but then it was like around 2010-ish, 11-ish or so, where they started kind of going downhill a bit, and that's when the PlayStation 3 started picking up. And the part of the reason for that is that they started going to, really putting a lot of focus on the Kinect. So that's what started it. And then it really was hammered down as far as how much popularity Microsoft and Xbox lost with the reveal of the Xbox One, with their whole DRM thing. And, it was just a big old cluster, which is kind of Ironic now, right, considering what Sony's doing, but we'll get to them later. But they lost a lot of credibility during that time, and they never really recovered. And so, because Phil Spencer didn't come into play afterwards, right? So you can almost say that he was trying to do the best he could, given what he was given. But and again, ultimately, regardless of who's to blame and all, just Xbox in general, there was a lot of bad decisions that were made, and really, I mean, the only reason why they are still, somewhat relevant is probably because they have the big pocketbook of Microsoft. Any other company, I can't see them, taking the hit as much as this, right? But let's get into it here with the statement that Asha Sharma said. So again, it's a bit lengthy here, but so it starts. So team, we are beginning the most significant restructure in Xbox history. After careful consideration, I've made this difficult decision to reduce our team by approximately 3,200 through fiscal year 2027. This will include approximately 1,600 role eliminations today. So this is as of the 6th of July. And in addition, 4 studios will leave Xbox to new management. I recognize that a year-long restructuring creates additional challenges. Unfortunately, it is not possible to make all the necessary changes in a single day, and I want to be direct about the scale. I know this is painful. These changes will directly affect people who have poured their creativity into building Xbox. Many joined us through acquisitions, while others were recruited here or sought us out because they loved this industry and loved Xbox. Today's decision does not reflect their talent or dedication. Our business today is not healthy. We are operating at margins that are 3 to 10 times lower than comparable platforms in publishing businesses. We entered Gen 9 with a smaller install base and high cost structure. To grow, we bet on Game Pass, multi-platform, and a broader portfolio of content. While those businesses have created meaningful value, they did not grow at the pace we expected. Uh, as that happened, our core business weakened, and we added more teams, more investment, and more time, hoping for a better outcome. And now the industry is facing the most severe hardware crisis in history. We must reset Xbox. First, we will reset our content portfolio. Since 2018, we have aggressively expanded our studio portfolio while the number of games created each month across the industry now outpaces the last 10 years combined. We now find ourselves competing not only with the largest publishers, but also with smaller independent studios. It is neither possible nor desirable to own every great independent studio. We have also learned that we are not the best home for every type of studio. In a typical year, we lost 64 cents for every dollar we invested. As we reset Xbox, we will help independent creators succeed by providing open development tools and audiences to realize their vision. Compulsion Games and Double Fine Productions will return to management and transition to independent studios with their IP catalog and runaway for their next games. Ninja Theory and Undead Labs have entered terms to join new ownership with funding to complete and grow Senua and State of Decay 3. In France, Arcane Management is beginning required consultation with its work council to review potential strategic options. So those were the ones that were in question, right? So it looks like ultimately they didn't get disbanded. Arcane seems to be kind of struggling there some, but at the very least, Compulsion Games, Double Fine, Ninja Theory, and Undead Labs, right? Because they had games in the works and all, or they have some beloved IP. At the very least, they're given the option, right, to kind of move on their own. We are also making reductions across other units and in some cases shifting investment to focus on higher priority projects. These changes vary in size across Blizzard, Keen, Mojang, and Xbox Game Studios. None of our first-party publicly announced games or projects are being canceled as part of these reductions. In addition, Mojang and Keen, so I know Mojang, I believe, is basically Minecraft, right, the developers of that, will now report directly to me. These 2 studios have increasingly become platforms that are our largest by monthly active players. They bring critical geographic, demographic, and differentiation to Xbox. Second, we will reset our platform. We know that great technology gets better when it gets simpler, not bigger. Let's see. Okay, sorry, lost my place. Okay, so today in some parts of the company, work passes through as many as 14 layers of management. I kept seeing this quote thrown around, and that's insane.
Our platform teams are 40% larger than they were at the start of this generation, even as our player base and playtime have declined. That complexity has slowed decisions, blurred accountability, and made it harder to deliver for players. As we reset Xbox, we will simplify. We will reduce management layers to no more than five, where possible three. We will deliver success through a flatter organization that is built around makers, individual contributors focused on building, player coaches, leaders who remain deeply involved in the work while developing their teams, and directly responsible individuals, or DRIs, as they're looks like they're being noted here as. Um, who own key decisions and outcomes. And we will streamline how we work across our tools with cleaner code base, shared services, and 50% reduced vendor spend. Third, we are resetting how we operate. As Xbox grew our headcount, we became more fragmented. Teams, studios, and functions often operate independently, and it became harder to work towards a shared goal, make the right trade offs, and get things done. For the first time, we are establishing a chief operating officer with end-to-end P&L responsibility across content, hardware platform, and services. Helen Chiang has been promoted over this role and will report directly to me. Over nearly 2 decades at Xbox, Helen has helped build some of the most important businesses from Xbox Live to leading Mojang and the Minecraft franchise. She will bring our businesses together under one operating model, making sure we make clear investment decisions, learn from our successes and failures, and hold ourselves accountable for results. Thank you, Dave McCarthy, who is retiring after 17 years with Xbox. Dave has played a defining role in building the platform that millions of players rely on every day, and has been a trusted partner through many of the biggest moments in Xbox history. We wish him all the best. These changes are about a bigger future for Xbox, not a smaller one. The decade of gaming will be larger, more global, and more creative than anything we've seen before. This year, we will invest as much in Xbox as we ever have, but we'll invest with greater focus, greater discipline, and greater clarity, all in service of making Xbox where the world plays and creates. I want Xbox to be one of the few companies that entertains more than 1 billion people each day and gives everyone an opportunity to create and connect. I know we can achieve this goal. Xbox has many of the most beloved franchises in entertainment history, talented studios around the world, and we will return to growth in 2027. History is full of companies that mistake longevity for inevitability. I can't say that for some reason. We will not be one of them. Asha. Damn, ruthless. And then, kind of adding to that, too, also, she took a position to help the Federal Reserve Productivity Task Force. So let's see, I saved a little something on this. So she's a busy individual. Let's see. So yes, so this is just a screenshot here that I saw. I think it's from some website. So yes, that Asha Sharma, the Asha Sharma who just 3 days ago, well, from the time when this article was posted, announced the Xbox reset that will see roughly 3,200 of her employees lose their jobs by the end of 2027 fiscal year. A reorganization that remaining developers are reportedly convinced that will cause irreparable damage to some of the company's most valuable brands. Sharma will be one of the 3 leaders heading up the Productivity and Job Task Force, which will assess the economic impact of new general purpose technologies, including artificial intelligence, to inform the Federal Reserve's policy judgments. She will be joined by Stanford economics professor Charles Jones, currently on leave at Anthropic, and Mark Anderson, tech VC, major AI investor, and guy who believes you can improve an LLM result by simply instructing it to be very, very smart. The Federal Reserve's commitment to price stability and maximum employment is unwavering, as is our resolve to pursue our mandate with rigor. The U.S. economy has changed significantly over the last generation, and ever more so than right now, Moore said, deploying a sentence that definitely made sense. Each task force will carefully consider whether policymakers, means and methods, and analytical tools and policy approaches can be improved on. I am honored to be with that the best minds from a range of disciplines have agreed to work with us to sharpen our performance as an institution. Considering Sharma announced that Mojang and Keen, 2 of Xbox's most valuable operations, will now report directly to her. I'm impressed that she'll be able to find time. According to the Fed, we will be able to follow the task force work updates and posted periodically on its website. So all right, a lot of stuff I don't quite 100% understand, but I mean, she seems to be kind of going in there and cutting the fat, so to speak, right? Um, Making changes where these changes need to be made, and it's as far as Xbox is concerned. So, kind of sticking with that, right? It's obviously there's a lot going on just in general, right, with the economy and all, but as far as Xbox is concerned, from what it seems like, right, and this is not playing the blame game and all, I mean, kind of to an extent, right, and all, but from what it seems like, whatever they were doing at Xbox there after like 2013, let's say from there, right, after Dawn Matrix was out, and then eventually Phil Spencer kind of got involved, and then eventually Sarah Bond and all, and then Game Pass and everything. I mean, they had decent ideas, right? I mean, the idea of Game Pass was pretty cool, actually, but at the end of the day, though, they made a lot of, it became down to like, I mean, I've said it before that for me, the best years of Xbox was from 2001 to really like around 2011 after they released Gears of War 3. Because then after that, I mean, they had some games that came out, right? No doubt, but nothing really that stood out that made me really want to say, I need an Xbox. I still got the Xbox One and Xbox Series X and S just because I'm a big old geek. But I mean, I really could have probably done without those systems because I mean, even like the Gears of Wars and Halos after 2011, they weren't horrible, but they weren't like those must-play games. And I can't really think of like a definitive exclusive that I got. I mean, I do like the Xbox ecosystem in a way, and especially with their backwards compatibility and how everything just kind of transfers over with ease. I thought that was pretty cool. But I can't really say that I bought those systems because I wanted that game that was exclusive to that system. And so they sort of lost their way in a lot of ways. And then again, the whole debacle with the DRM thing that they announced at the reveal of the Xbox One. And so there's a lot of decisions that were made. They acquired a lot of companies, Bethesda Software, and then eventually, I mean, that's Bethesda, and then like ID Software, and also a lot of talented development teams, and then eventually, the whole Activision acquisition that they did, right? But the whole time it kind of became, where are the games? I mean, I think that most people understand that games just take a while to make, but nothing was really coming out right from these studios that was like, okay, these are like the must play games. There was a lot of like re-releases and whatnot, but nothing that like not another Fallout 5 or an Elder Scroll 6. I mean, Elder Scroll 6 has been announced, but I think I mentioned earlier that that's still about 2 years away or so, if that. And so ultimately, these studios just weren't really producing anything. The thought is, from what I keep seeing or hearing, is that under like this Phil Spencer era and Sarah Bond era, they were very much like kind of had a very potentially like a free flow management style, right? Like, hey, work on what you wish, and take your time on it and all. It's sort of the vibe that people are getting. I don't know for sure. Obviously, I didn't work there, and I'm sure there's a lot of internal stories, right, that'll probably eventually come out that might clarify some of that more. But that's sort of the feel that I get, right? Because I mean, nothing was coming out on these systems, and they made all these purchases. I mean, just with the Activision acquisition alone, right? That's insane how much they paid for that. But ultimately, it just came down to these. Nothing was being produced. The other thing too, also, and I think something that I was kind of thinking about this, and I think something that maybe it's just kind of like a reality, right, of where we're at as I feel like we're sort of at these crossroads, right, with as gamers that have been in this business for a while, and a lot of the companies that we used to rely on a lot to produce a lot of quality content, right, like like Bethesda or ID Software or Rocksteady and all these companies, right? That were delivering a bunch of great games. Naughty Dog, I mean, some of them are still doing good, like Insomniac Games, for example. But a lot of these other companies, they haven't really outputted as much as we were grown used to. And the reality is that a lot of these teams, when they were doing good, like let's say like those companies that I mentioned, when they had like a lot of these big hits, right? It was kind of like within the sixth and seventh generation or so, right? But we're long past that generation, right? I mean, the eighth generation started in 2013. That was about 16 years ago. And so I guess what I'm getting at is because they were talking about also, and again, some of this information I might not have correctly, but there was like someone that was like a legacy employee at I think at Bethesda that they let go. She was like been around I guess since the Morrowind days. A lot of senior staff apparently got let go, and so I don't know what's going on in the background, but I guess what I'm trying to get at is that these companies just aren't what they used to be, possibly because of just changing in management and all, or potentially that just, a lot of these key developers, right, are getting older and maybe they're retiring or whatnot, right? So now it's a new generation coming in. And, ultimately, they're not going to have the same pedigree and all, or maybe even the same, and not necessarily because they're not as talented. It's just it's a new generation. New generation comes in with different thoughts, feelings, and everything, right? Or work structures, work ethics, and what have you. That it just changes the identity of a company of what we've known before. The reality is that we've gone through a lot of years now, right, where we were comfortable with these companies. Now, some companies have been able to continuously produce a lot of quality products, right, like Nintendo, Sega, Capcom, Konami's kind of making a bit of a comeback and all, but there's also a lot of companies that unfortunately haven't. And so I almost think like it's getting to the point now where potentially because this leads to another story. So let's get into this one too here because this kind of touches on that, and that is for id Software, right? So they're like the developers of Doom, I believe Wolfenstein and all. So ID Software loses 136 jobs now. Less than 50 are left. Um, and again, I don't know for sure if that was needed, if that was just a very brutal tactic by, you know, the new CEO here, right? Just kind of like maybe very irresponsibly cutting part of this team. I don't know that for sure, but these teams just aren't really what they used to be. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, this is horrible what's happening to, especially the people that are losing their jobs. Again, I'm always have my heart goes out to like anybody that's facing any kind of financial hardship in these days. But when it comes down to it, if you're just looking at it from a very kind of brutal but objective perspective, this is potentially what needed to happen. And it's kind of like, burning down the forest, right? Because it's getting too thick, kind of thing. And, I mean, maybe something will come out of this, something where a lot of the legacy studios, as smart as the ones that just haven't really been producing a lot, ultimately, we lose them, but potentially out of that, new companies grow, right? Or the companies that have still been able to produce quality products, right, continue to shine. Maybe it's time for the new players to step in, right? I mean, because again, throughout this whole stretch, right, that we've been hearing all this stuff about video games and bad news and all, there's still been a lot of quality games that have been coming out. I mean, for sure, right? I mean, and some of it has been from new players, right? I mean, that's going to happen. Eventually, new teams come in, new developers and whatnot. And I mean, I just think about like I don't know, like two of the most prominent games that I played recently, Clear Obscure. So that's what Sandfall Interactive, I think. So that's a pretty new team. Team Cherry, I mean, they're somewhat new, right, with their Hollow Knight series, which is amazing. And so maybe it's time for to let these new developers, right, kind of take their time to shine. Let them become the new id Software, Bethesda, right, or new Capcom or what have you, right? I mean, a lot of time, there's been a decent amount of time now that has passed in the video game industry that, things change, studios change, and all, and people change, people retire, people move on or whatnot. I always think about like my own personal history of like, say, jobs that I've had before in the past. And, like if I look back at a job that I've had before in the past, and I think about the team that I worked with there, and let's say we were successful, we got along really well, we got things done and all. But then, if I find out like who's still there, the team, and how they're producing things and all, or how productive they are and all, you know, it's different. Maybe not necessarily bad, but it's different. Same company, but it's just different, and that's just the reality, right? A lot of the games that are being developed is not necessarily just the company that developed them, right? It's individuals that contributed to that. And those individuals change with time. It's the passing of time. And so I don't know. It's just something I was thinking about. And, you know, it's unfortunate, like I said, right? My heart always goes out to anybody that had to unfortunately or unexpectedly lose their job. But it's, but potentially it is part of what needs to happen. Um, you know, and maybe there was a lot of fault on this, right? Of the people that were there. I mean, 14 layers of management. That sounds very, and again, without knowing more detail on this, right? This is just speculation, but I mean, it sounds highly irresponsible of how they were hiring people. Why would you need 14 levels of management? I don't know. I don't know how that was being distributed across Xbox and Microsoft and all. It just seems like complete overkill. Um, but I don't know. It's kind of crazy. We'll see ultimately what comes of this, but regardless, so right, if for anybody that lost their job, it's I'm sure it's very rough, and hopefully people land on their feet somehow. And um, and the other crazy thing is, so there's 3,200 people that are being let go that we know of, right? 1,600 already lost their jobs. The rest, 1,600, from what I understand, that's to kind of go throughout the year. So meaning that people could be working within an Xbox studio, not really knowing, am I going to get let go or not? And so then, what is that going to do for like the creativity process, the developing of these games and all. Again, it comes, it's people that make these games. People have emotions, people have concerns, people have inspirations, and we're human. There's a human element to it. And I can't imagine working in an environment like that where it's not very stressful. I mean, I will say just from me personally, I've been through a few situations now where I was laid off or potentially was going to get laid off, right? And you're kind of there in that waiting period, waiting to find out what's going to happen. I've been through that three times now, and fairly recently I went through that. Ultimately, I wasn't part of the cut that my company did, but there was like about 4 days or so where we were waiting for more information. And I mean, I couldn't really focus on my job just because I'm thinking, well, fuck, man, what am I going to get let go? What's going to happen? And eventually, once I found out that I wasn't getting let go, there was a sigh of relief. But then when they showed the list of people that got let go, some people that I had worked with, communicated with, right, and all they were cool people, and there was a bit of like a sadness to it, right, and I can feel that across the company for a couple of months afterwards, because again, there's that human element to it. Here's someone that I, you know, shared work with, that I collaborated with, and all of a sudden they're just gone, you know. And so then I do think about hopefully that they land on their feet. I hope that dude's doing good, or I hope she found a different job or what have you, right? And so there's that element to it as well, and it's rough, And again, this is just the video game industry. I also understand that this is happening across the board in a lot of different industries. Like I said, my industry has nothing to do with video games, and we were affected by something like that. And it's unfortunate, but hopefully, things get back on track and for these people, and they find some kind of employment, and and again, I guess because it's happening, at the very least, right, and all, I think that hopefully that the decisions that this management is doing is a very commendable effort to right things that were wrong, because again, a lot of what's it seems like this Asha lady was bringing in just to kind of like be the executioner, right, when it was needed, perhaps, and because of mistakes of people that were there before. Again, Phil Spencer, Sarah Bond, who knows, right? Considering the way that they left the company, it almost seems like they were definitely not making the best decisions. But we don't know, right? At least I don't. People maybe that have more inside knowledge, right, might know more. But that's just kind of the gist that I get from it. And so, like I said, right, hopefully things work out in the end. But just one of those we will see things. But on a somewhat better news, though, for Xbox, and this is something that we've spoken about before, but there's a bit more to the story here. So the Xbox disc to digital reaches insider testing. So it's called Positron, and so basically, it could be just days away from this being announced or being released or whatever it is that they're doing. Looks like on there's been some insiders, right, that have been talking about this, and basically the gist of it is that this could be right around the corner, right? So somehow where it's going to let you take a disc, put it in, I would assume in your Xbox, and then it somehow converts it to a digital copy, which is kind of cool. I mean, so when I was getting rid of a lot of my physical media, it was known as Voodoo, but now it's called Fandango. They had this option that was pretty cool, and I don't know if you can still do it, but you could on selected movies, and there was actually a decent amount where you could scan it. And so, like on the app, right, it would have this thing where you can scan the barcode of the movie, and if it was on their list that it would qualify, you can convert it to a digital copy. And so you would pay like, I think it was like $2 for a SD version, or $5 for a HD version, or if you already had the Blu-ray version, that it was $2 for the HD version, something like that. And I remember I converted a lot of movies over that way before I got rid of them. I just wanted a digital copy. The only bad thing is that it's on Voodoo, now Fandango's platform, right? And so I'm just kind of at the mercy of, that platform doesn't go on there, or they lose a lot of their licenses. And so, we'll see. But it was a pretty cool option, right? I won't. I'll give it that. So we'll see what comes of it. I mean, I don't necessarily hate it, but it's still going to come down to, though, that will we retain the right of ownership for these products that we have. And we're going to talk more about that when I get into the PlayStation side, because that's a big old fucking mess over there. But at the very least, right? I don't hate that idea. So we'll see kind of what happens with that there. But let's jump over now to PlayStation, because oh my god, PlayStation, man, it's just not a good time for video games right now. We are in some form of a crash, right? Again, it's different than what it was before, potentially even worse, I would say. But this is about the Sony, because it all sounds shady. That's the thing, right? Because so this story that broke out, so this is from stockhouse.com, but it was all over the place, so on a lot of different media sites. But Sony CEO sells more than half of company stock after PlayStation abandons physical media. So let's see. So Sony Group Corporation CEO Hiroki Totaki has sold more than half of his personal stake in the company, according to a recent filing with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, a move that has attracted attention because of its timing following a major PlayStation announcement. The SEC filing shows that Tataki, 61 years old, sold 225,000 shares of Sony stock on July 3rd at a price of US $21.02 per share, generating approximately 4.7 US dollars from the transaction. The sale represented roughly 56% of his holdings in the company. Following the transaction, Tataki retained 173,250 shares of Sony stock. The sale occurred just 2 days after Sony announced plans to end production of physical PlayStation game discs in January of 2028, a decision that sent shockwaves throughout the gaming industry and sparked widespread debate about the future of physical media. Let's see. Sony stock reportedly experienced a modest increase after the announcement, adding another layer of interest to the timing of Tataki's share sale. Okay, so make that of what you will. I don't understand like the stock market that much to really give too much more insight on that, other than that it just smells highly suspect. But here's the other thing too, also, right? So with all this that's coming out, again, there's been a big old shitstorm that's happened with Sony, and just the backlash that has come out from it. It's been pretty big, and I mean, I will say, I'm not one that is like loyal to a company. I think that's weird, honestly, right? The only time I was ever, I guess you can say, loyal to a company was when I was a kid for Sega, right? But I called Sega. They gave me a Fantasy Star map. I thought it was like the coolest thing ever. I thought Sega was cool, right? But I'm a stupid kid. After that, never. Not even for the companies I've worked for, right? Like right now, I feel like I work for a pretty good company, but I'm not going to sell my soul to it, and let alone for being a customer, right, of a product that I buy for a company. So let's say, for example, I mean, geez, like I don't even know why someone would be like that, right? Like I have a Android Samsung Galaxy phone. I'm not like obsessed with Samsung. I have an LG TV that I like. I'm not obsessed with LG. So then if we're getting into video games, I mean, I have a Nintendo systems, I have PlayStation systems, I have a Steam Deck, I have an Xbox. I'm kind of a geek to video games, but I'm not specifically, and I've liked a lot of the things that these companies have done for sure, but I'm not like loyal to them, right, in any sense. I mean, but I'm also not like someone that is gonna, I guess, take it personal, right, when something happens on the company themselves, right? That's generally not who I am. I don't get on Twitter or whatever, right, and you know, and just stir shit up. Basically, I don't know. I find that very immature. Having said that, though, uh, if there is something that I do feel is very unconsumer friendly, right, that affects a decent amount of people, right, then yeah, I'm definitely one for the right to speak up right against it, right. So, for example, like I don't know, you go to a restaurant and there's a lot of people complaining about that the food is shitty, right, or getting them sick. Then absolutely, right, you can complain about that. There are times for that, right. So again, I'm not saying no. That's never a good time to protest against a company or a business. But I guess it's just that there needs to be like a good call for it, I guess, is what I'm getting at. So, having said that, right, these new information that has come out about Sony PlayStation is really right now making me consider, like, I'm sort of at a crossroads here right now. And again, that as far as like what I'm going to do about this hobby. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm still a gamer, right? I'm still going to continue playing video games and all, but it's not something though that, um, as far as like and I've already talked about it before, where I'm not really looking into keeping up with the latest and greatest, but I guess I'm kind of, because especially because I'm trying to do this podcast and channel and all. I'm sort of like, where do I go from here, right? I mean, there's tons of stuff I guess I could talk about and sort of turn my channel, I guess, a little bit more focused on the retro side of things, but it leaves me questioning myself on this. But this is what's come out though, and this is from Jason Schreier, right? So so he seems to be, I mean, as far as I guess where he's getting the sources from and all that, that's pretty good. I know he's had some complaints as far as like the his interpretation of some of the stories, right? But at the very least, he does seem to have some knowledge, right? So basically, this is from a post that came from Noticias PlayStation. So it looks like this is translated from Spanish, but basically, so Jason Schreier shares some new information about the future physical format on PlayStation. Sony considers, so these are some, apparently some information that he was receiving. Um, let's see here. Sony considers that its digital player base is already large enough to do without those who continue buying games in physical format. So that's point number one. Next point, the company will not change its retail distribution model. Stores will continue selling boxes, but they will only include a downloadable code. Next point, currently, when Sony sells a first party physical game to a retailer, the latter gets around 30% of the sales price, $70. With the 100% digital format, Sony would keep all of those revenues. Let's see. And as a result, the company expected to significantly increase its profit margins. And let's see here. So, additional information from other reports. So, Sony would be convinced that over time, most players will end up accepting the transition to a 100% digital ecosystem. Next point, the company believes that users will continue supporting PlayStation even without the option to buy physical games. And last point, additionally, they consider that it is not necessary to maintain direct communication with fans about this decision, as they trust in the strength of the brand and the loyalty of their community. All right, so a lot there, right? A lot of thoughts on that there. So again, I've talked about how I've been more of a digital gamer, right, for the past several years. But I mean, really, the only physical games that I've gotten, pretty, within, I would say within the past 6 or 7 years, has been, bless her heart, my wife, who, sometimes she'll give me a game, right, and all, and she's not, I don't think she really follows like a lot of this stuff and all. So she just gets me a game, and she's gotten me a handful of gift cards, and but sometimes she'll beat me like a physical game, and so I've kept those. I'm like, oh, okay, I got a physical game of this, right? Like Alan Wake 2 and a handful of other ones, right? So now I'm really holding on to those there, right? But but yeah, it's I don't know, it's man, it I can see why people are upset about this, because going back to what I just said about, I'm not someone that is like loyal to a brand, I'm not, or a company, I'm not but I'm also not someone that's going to lash out at everything, right? And all. I mean, I always look at a business as a business, right? They're making their decisions based on what's going to make them profitable. So I'm not going to be loyal to that. I mean, because they're chasing money. Why would I put my loyalty to something like that? My loyalty is to my, a higher power than me, right? A higher, God and my, my family and all, not to like a company. But having said that, though, so like I talked about earlier, though, if a company is doing something that is very egregious and all, then yeah, absolutely, this is a time where they should be told to go fuck themselves. It's th- this whole thing of like all these corporations going to the stance of like, you will own nothing and you will be happy, as I see that thrown around a lot. It's getting ridiculous, right? And perhaps as consumers we all let this happen, right? You can certainly say that. But now is the time though where I think that a lot of people should be pushing back on it and saying no, this is not the way it's going to be. um, and I mean, we are going into this very digital future. I mean, AI is taking over and all. It's just, someone that was born like in. It's funny because I'm actually getting punked on my age here as I'm kind of finishing up my workday here. But as someone that's been around for a while, now at 46 years old, it's the world has changed a lot, and I mean, I think it's something that part of us has to kind of accept that things are going digital, things are going AI, things are going in a much different direction. And but at the same time, though, right, it doesn't mean that you have to lose yourself completely or lose your values over it as well. And so so for like me personally, having said all this and all, is I'm definitely not looking on getting the PlayStation 6 now, and really looking on at wherever I can to buy less, but at the same time what I do buy, try to buy it in a way that I am confident that I have ownership of it, right? So now, for example, when it comes to video games, I'm going to be doing a little bit more research on like, okay, which games come fully on the physical format. So actually, what I've been doing on my Amazon wish list is that I've been going through like some of my favorite games of all time and just saying, okay, is there some kind of a physical version that I can get of this? And actually, a little bit after within this past week, because I'm kind of starting to prepare a bit. Like I said, I'm not going to get a whole bunch of games just because part of the reason I got rid of my old library was I just didn't have the room for it. But there's a handful of things that I'm going to be getting now, though, right? The things that I really, really enjoy. And so I bought the Final Fantasy VII remake and rebirth package for the PS5. It was on sale on Amazon, and that's the thing, right? They're taking away the options on how you can buy something for cheaper because the package deal that I bought, it came out to like I think like 35 bucks, I think is what it costs on Amazon for both games. Where I haven't checked online, but I'm sure that it would be more expensive, right? If I were to get the digital versions again. Now again, I bought those games because I'm just a huge sucker for that. Again, if you listen to anything I've said, I'm kind of a sucker for. What's the word now? Shill, I guess, for Final Fantasy VII. But then I also bought The Last of Us Part One, and so I looked them up on that website that does it play, and from what I can tell, it seems like the games are pretty playable offline. So you might need to download like a patch or two or so, right? But other than that, they're pretty playable offline and all. And so I'm going to slowly be kind of buying a few games, right, that I just feel are like my absolute must-haves, just because because they're special to me. They're things that I really want to continue owning and cherishing, right? I don't want to getting lost in time from when either my PlayStation 5 crashes out or my Switch or whatever, right? And then the servers go down, right? Where I can't access those games anymore. Um, you know, so yeah, I'm gonna maybe be looking at my. I did a little video on the PlayStation 3 on things that I'm suggesting to maybe stock up on, whether if it's digitally or physically, since that store is going on there. But I'm gonna kind of keep a lookout for maybe other games that I might be missing on that system there, or really start looking into PlayStation 3 emulation again, just so I'm preserving these as best as possible. And yeah, it's interesting. I've listened to a lot of videos these past week and a half or so, right, of people expressing their concerns and everything and their outrage and whatnot. There's a lot of beautiful takes on people's feelings about this, and what I mean by that is just like how people are speaking up, right? How they are um, cherishing a lot of these things that they have, and that even if like our generation is going to be the last ones, right, that are appreciating this, then so be it, right? But it doesn't mean that but that we have to give it up now. We'll take it to our dying bed if need be, right? Where we're clutching onto whatever it is that we really hold dear. because a lot of this stuff is special to us. Because I am acknowledging that we are moving towards a period of time where um, it's where we're just content after content after content we're consuming, but not really cherishing what we have. Like I think I've talked about it before, and all where for as far as like movies goes, where a lot of like writers and developers of movies and directors and whatnot have admitted that they sort of make their movies now with the assumption uh, that whoever's watching them is not 100% paying attention to it, right? Because people are on their phones or whatnot, right? Just, you know, mindlessly scrolling on their phones and all. And it's unfortunate, right? Because, as someone that was trying to be an artist of some sort in the past, and, the effort that you're trying to put into something, right? Your inspiration and everything to put some kind of a, passion into something and all that you want to put out there to the world, right? For whatever your reasons are for it, only for it to just be like consumed and tossed to the wayside. I mean, it's a bit depressing, and it seems inevitable, but it doesn't mean also that we have to just completely give up on it, right? And so it's actually I've really enjoyed listening to a lot of people's perspectives when it comes to this. Has made me evaluate, not only how I'm buying video games and all, but also the things that I cherish, right? And then also how I want to hold on to them and how important memories are, right? And art is, right, in this world. And so I know it all sounds a little maybe perhaps deep, when it's just video games, but that's how important this is to a lot of people. And I think that speaks volumes, right, on, that this move that Sony made is very, very unconsumer friendly, very just very cruel, and at the very least, right, that we're not going to go out without a fight. I guess is kind of what I'm trying to get at.
But let's move on now, though. Let's get our minds out of the whole modern gaming craze and let's go back to a time where game was a little bit more pure, where it was starting to really revolutionize itself with the introduction of 3D gaming, and a game that probably is one of the best examples of going from when we went from like the 2D pixel art graphics to 3D, and kind of the jump from this, right, from games in the series that was 2D, and then what this game did was truly monumental. This game is considered to be the best game of all time in many circles. That in You pretty much ask anybody, right, that has been playing a variety of games, right, and all, and the Legend of Zelda comes up. There was a countdown that was done by a website GVG, or a YouTube channel GVG. And so this was from the fans, right? They were basically asking fans to vote in on what their favorite games of all time were. And then they did a breakdown. It was pretty extensive. It's a pretty fun series to watch too. I believe they did it last year. And so they would pick top 10 games from pretty much all the major consoles, going back all the way to the Nintendo. And at the end, they would accumulate all the votes and everything for all the games that were voted on, right? So the top 10 for each system, and then they made kind of like an ultimate list, right? Like the top 50 games of all time based on votes. Ocarina of Time came in at number 2. Number 1 was Breath of the Wild. And so even though it didn't quite get number 1, it still definitely shows just the importance of this game for many people still. As some games, when time has passed, they perhaps haven't aged as well. Could be a lot of the nostalgia talking. But the fact that people still highly regard this game goes to show just its lasting power. And so, yeah, so again, that's The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time that came out originally on the Nintendo 64. So let's talk about this game that is still considered the highest rated game on Metacritic. Let's get into it here. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time is a 1998 action-adventure game developed and published by Nintendo for the Nintendo 64. It was the first Legend of Zelda game with 3D graphics. It was released in Japan and in North America in 1998 and in PAL regions the following month. It came out in November in 1998 and then in PAL regions the following month. So Ocarina of Time was developed by Nintendo's Entertainment, Analysis, and Development Division. It was led by 5 directors, including Eiji Aonuma, who he's sort of been the ongoing director, right, for a lot of Zelda games since, and Yoshiaki Koizuma, produced by series co-creator Shigeru Miyamoto, and written by Kensuke Tanabe. Series composer Koji Kondo wrote its soundtrack. The players control Link in the realm of Hyrule on a quest to stop the evil King Ganondorf by traveling through time and navigating dungeons in an overworld. The game introduced features such as a target lock system and context-sensitive buttons, which have since become common in 3D adventure games. The player must progress or must play songs on an ocarina to progress. Ocarina of Time was acclaimed by critics who praised its visuals, sound, gameplay, soundtrack, and writing. It has been ranked by numerous publications as one of the greatest video games ever made and the highest rated game on the review aggregator Metacritic. It sold more than 7 million copies worldwide and was pre-ordered 3 times more than any other game at the time in the US. Wow. Ocarina of Time has been re-released on all Nintendo home consoles and on the iQue player in China. Some releases include Master Quest, an alternative version including new puzzles and increased difficulty. A sequel, Majora's Mask, was released for the Nintendo 64 in 2000. A remake for Nintendo 3DS, Ocarina of Time 3D, was released in 2011. A second remake is scheduled for the Nintendo Switch 2 in 2026. So yeah, I mean, this game, it's funny because all these games I've been talking about, right, are considered like one of the greatest games I've ever made, but this one definitely it is. I would say that about as objectively as possible when you ask pretty much any video game fan, again, that's been playing a decent range of video games, right? Not just gamers that are just, only play like one particular series and such. Because obviously if you just don't like Zelda, you don't like it, right? But I think in general, about as objectively as possible, the 2 games that usually come up as like some of the best games of all time is, nowadays more is probably going to be Breath of the Wild. But this game is still right there with it. That and also Super Mario World too seems to get a lot of love too. And then probably The Witcher 3 and Red Dead Redemption 2 seems to be games that also are pretty high on your list whenever I see like a top 100. But, the fact that this game still stands tall, right? Having it come out in 1998, it's still very impressive. There is a lot about the game, I will say, that, maybe hasn't quite aged the best. I know when I go back to it, it's a bit rough to get into with certain spots. But the overall sense of adventure that this game has, it's truly unparalleled in most any other game that I've ever played. And that's why, to me, this game still really stands tall. That, and also, I think the reason for me personally that I prefer this game over Breath of the Wild is because I love Breath of the Wild. I think that's an amazing game, and perhaps I will talk about that game in due time. But I kind of prefer this Zelda formula more, where you have a hub world, you have these dungeons to explore, you're getting an item, right, to unlock a new parts of the dungeon, and then eventually on the overworld map, but it's not completely open world. I still find this to be the best Zelda formula. It's what's basically used in A Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, to an extent Wind Waker, even though Wind Waker is a little bit more open-ended, but still kind of the same. Twilight Princess, which is an absolute still one of my more higher favorite Zelda games also. And so for that reason there, I think is why this one still shines high for me. But let's kind of break down a little bit here of what makes this game just so special, starting with the gameplay, because it was really revolutionary what it was doing at the time. And so the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time is a fantasy action-adventure set in a 3-dimensional world with an expansive environment. Let's see. Oop, I just looked down for a little. Okay. The game world is mostly rendered in real-time polygonal 3D, while a few areas make use of pre-rendered backgrounds. So for example, like when you first start off the game, when Link wakes up, the room that he's in his treehouse, that's pre-rendered, and some of the other houses too there also in that initial village that you start off in have pre-rendered backgrounds, and then eventually like the main town and the the village or the town that's in front of the Hyrule Castle and all. Players control series protagonist Link from a third-person perspective. Link primarily fights with a sword and shield, but can also use other weapons such as projectiles, bombs, and magic spells. The control schemes introduce techniques such as context-sensitive action and a target system called Z-targeting, which allowed the player to have Link focus on enemies or objects. When using this technique, the camera follows the target, and Link consistently faces it. Projectile attacks are automatically directed at the target and do not require manual aiming. Context-sensitive actions allow multiple tasks to be assigned to one button, simplifying the control scheme. The on-screen display shows what will happen when the button is pushed, and changes depend on what the character is doing. For example, the button that causes Link to push a box, if he is standing next to it, will have him climb a box if the analog stick is pushed forward toward it. Much of the game is spent exploring and fighting, but some parts require stealth. Link gains abilities by collecting items and weapons found in dungeons or in the overworld, including several optional side quests and minor objectives. Side quests can reward new players or new weapons or abilities. In one side quest, Link trades items with a non-player character in a trading sequence that features 10 items and ends with him receiving two-handed Bigoron sword, the strongest sword. In another side quest, Link can acquire a horse who allows him to travel faster but restricts him to only attacking with arrows while riding. Link is given an ocarina near the beginning of the game, which is later replaced by the Ocarina of Time. Link learns 12 melodies that allow him to solve music-based puzzles and teleport to previously visited locations. The Ocarina of Time is also used to claim the Master Sword in the Temple of Time, which causes Link to be transported 7 years into the future and become an adult. Young Link and Adult Link have different abilities. For example, only Adult Link can use the fairy bow, and only Young Link can fit through certain small passages. After completing certain tasks, Link can freely travel between the two time periods by replacing and taking the sword. So for the plot, which is probably one of my, Legend of Zelda games they have decent plots, right? They're not, for sure, but nothing too incredibly deep and all. I think Ocarina of Time probably has my favorite Zelda story, though. Maybe that and Twilight Princess. I really enjoyed the stories of these games. But Ocarina of Time is set in a fictional kingdom of Hyrule, the setting of most Legend of Zelda games. Hyrule Field serves as a central hub and is connected to several outlying areas with diverse topography, which are home to the races of Hyrule. On the eastern outskirts of Hyrule are the Kokiri Forest, where the childlike Kokiri and their fairy companions reside, and Zora River, home of the fish-like Zora race. North is Hyrule Castle and its surrounding town, where the royal family and most Hylians reside, and Kakariko Village at the foot of Death Mountain, home of the rock-consuming Gorons. The secluded western desert belongs to the Gerudo, a population mostly consisting of women who serve the king, a man that is born once every century. Lon Lon Ranch, a ranch renowned for its horse and high-quality milk, sits in the center of Hyrule Field, and Lake Hylia to the south serves as a touristic fishing attraction where the Water Temple resides. The Water Temple. We'll get into that more later. Characters. So players control Link, a young boy living in the Kokiri Forest, which is also home to the Kokiri friend Saria, and guarded by the Great Deku Tree. Unlike other Kokiri, Link does not have a fairy companion until the Great Deku Tree instructs the fairy Navi to be his guide. Navi is used to contextualize Z-targeting for the player and also provides hints and advice. On his quest, Link befriends Malon, daughter of Lon Lon Ranch's owner Talon, Darunia, the leader of the Gorons, and Ruto, the Zora princess. Link also meets Princess Zelda, who is under the watch of her Sheikah caretaker Impa, and encounters the king of the Gerudo Ganondorf. In his adulthood, Link meets Raur, the Sage of Light, who disguises himself as the owl Kepura Gebora. Kind of horrible pronouncing these. And Naburo, the de facto leader of the Gerudo in Ganondorf's absence. Along the way, Link is aided by Sheik, a mysterious young Sheikah. Link is also aided by great fairies who give him magical abilities. So let's see how much of the story do I want to go into. Let's see. All right, so I'm just going to read this little part here. So Navi awakens Link from a nightmare in which he watches a man in black armor pursuing a young girl on horseback. Link is brought to the Great Deku Tree, who has been cursed by a wicked man of the desert. Before dying, the Great Deku Tree gives Link the spiritual stone of the forest and sends him to Hyrule Castle to speak with the Hyrule Princess. And so that's sort of what embarks the journey. So you start off in the Kokori village, and what I like about the intro to this, it's a very like whimsical. It's very like almost like fantasy storybook setting, and what really helps this is that again, the graphics haven't aged the best and all, but even back then and even to this day, there's a certain sense of like the sort of enclosed space, right, that it feels a little compact in, but it feels very lived in, with all the different Kokori there and going about their lives. So you got the Saria that wakes you up, and right off the bat you just got to get the impression that you and her have been friends for a while. And then you got, what's his name, Mito, the kind of dude that's a bit of a jerk, right, and all, but seems to be also like the team or the town leader. And then the two twins, and then you got the owner there, and then you have like a little training ground area. And so all of it kind of, makes it seem like it's a very tightly knit little community there. And the surrounding trees and all kind of makes it seem like a world unto a world within a world. And then all the kind of like the floating like lights or whatever they are, right? It definitely gives it a very fun, very like almost like a certain innocence to this place, and that's kind of hidden away from the rest of the world. And so the fact that this is where you start in, right, and all kind of seems that eventually when you step out, it makes the world seem just that much grander, right? Now Hyrule Field and all, eventually, I mean, I guess it's small by today's standards, but at the time it felt immense. And that was one of the, I feel like that was a pretty incredible strength at first of this game. It's just giving you that sense of exploration in this vast world. As, you do some tasks there in that Kokori village, which eventually leads you to talk to the Great Deku Tree. You enter into the first dungeon, which is really excellent at getting you used to the mechanics of the game. And so then eventually, you fight the boss and you get your the slingshot in this dungeon. And so again, all of that is great. And then after you beat that dungeon, then the Great Deku Tree kind of gives you a little bit of an overview of kind of the world you reside in, right, with the goddesses and all, which is in a cool little cutscene there. And then eventually, the Great Deku Tree dies, and then you set on your main adventure. And yeah, it's a really great introduction to this game, and it's like I said, I really love that it starts off in such a small little space, and then it breaks you out right into a much grander world. And just, I don't know, something about that's almost like the classic tale of the young person setting out on a from a small village, right, setting out on a vast adventure. It's, that's been a trope that's been done many, many times, but it's also a really good trope for an adventure kind of storytelling, and I felt it to be really powerful here. But again, that's all. I'll get into the story here without, revealing too much more. Again, the story isn't anything too grandiose, but it's still pretty well done overall. And, the NPCs you get to interact with, they're a lot of fun, and has kind of some dramatic moments in it as well too, as far as for a Zelda game. And yeah, just overall, and I'll just say a very satisfying conclusion as well too. I was pretty happy with it. And yeah, so just the overall plot of this game, I think, is pretty well done. But on the development of this game, though, so the Ocarina of Time was developed concurrently with Super Mario 64 and Mario Kart 64 for the Nintendo 64 by Nintendo Entertainment Analysis and Development Division in 1994 for more than $12 million with a staff of more than 200. Development was migrated from the 64DD disk drive peripheral to cartridge due to the high data throughput of streaming 500 motion capture character animations through gameplay. Let's see. So the 64DD, so if you don't know what this is, I'll just kind of read a little bit about it here. So it was a peripheral developed for the Nintendo to expand the capabilities of the Nintendo 64 with rewritable magnetic discs and online connectivity. Announced in 1995 before the Nintendo 64's 1996 launch, it faced multiple delays before being released in Japan on December 11th of 1999. The 64 references both the Nintendo 64 console and the 64 megabit storage capacity of the disc, while the DD stands for disk drive or dynamic drive. Despite its innovative features, it struggled to gain traction and was discontinued after a short-lived run in Japan. So yeah, so not much was done with this, but basically the point of it was that it was going to allow for some games, right, to have just more memory, I guess, basically. But ultimately, like I said, it just never really took off there. But initially targeted for 60 megabytes, it was increased to 32 megabytes as Nintendo's largest game at the time. Let's see. Early in development, the team had concerns about the data storage constraints of the cartridge. In the worst case scenario, Ocarina of Time would follow a similar structure to Super Mario 64, with Link restricted to Ganondorf's castle as a central hub, using a portal system similar to paintings that Mario uses to traverse the realm. An idea that arose from this stage of development, a battle with the doppelganger of Ganondorf that rides through paintings, was used as the boss of the Forest Temple dungeon. So yeah, Mario, from what I understand, Mario 64 was a big sort of template, right, for how they would try to do this game. And so, yeah, interesting, right, that's originally what they were going to do, which would have been an interesting concept, I guess, but I think them really reaching out, right, to doing kind of like a bit of at the time, right, like an open world segment was ultimately benefited the game a lot. But while series co-creator Shigeru Miyamoto had been the principal director and producer of Super Mario 64, he was involved in the game's production and now in charge of 5 directors by acting as producer and supervisor of Ocarina of Time. Different parts were handled by different directors, a new strategy for Nintendo EAD. 4 or 5 initial teams grew over time, each working on different basic experiments, including scenario and planning, Link's actions, transforming classic 2D items into 3D form, camera experiments, motion capture, sound effects, and special effects, and the flow of time. The dungeons were designed by Eiji Aonuma. So, wow. I love the dungeon designs in these games. Everything from like the setting, of the dungeons, right? Like where they take place in, the overall map layout and the puzzles within them. Truly some of the best in the series and really in gaming of all time. And one of the things that makes this game such a standout. So props to him, right, for doing such great work on this. Although the development team was now to 3D games, assistant director Makoto Miyanaga recalled the passion for creating something new and unprecedented. The towns in Ocarina of Time were based on medieval Europe. When creating Hyrule Castle's market, Miyamoto traveled to Germany for inspiration of its half-timbered architecture and Lower Franconia, spending a few weeks in northern Bavaria. Despite the setting being a medieval tale of sword and sorcery, Miyamoto used the Chanbara samurai genre of Japanese sword fighting as a model for the combat and was content with the positive worldwide reception. The development involved more than 120 people, including stunt performers, used to capture the effects of sword fighting and Link's movement. Miyamoto initially intended Ocarina of Time to be played in a first-person perspective to enable players to take in the vast terrain of Hyrule Field better and let the team focus more on developing enemies and environments. The concept was abandoned once the idea of a child Link was introduced, and Miyamoto believed it necessary for Link to be visible on screen. Yeah, that would have been a bit weird, having a child Link, right, done in first person as far as from like trying to do that like in a control perspective. But originally, Z-targeting involved a generic marker, but Koizumi changed the design to that of a fairy to make it less robotic. The fairy gained the name of the fairy navigation system among staff, and ultimately this turned into the name Navi. Okay, interesting. Which in turn resulted in the birth of Navi's character. The birth of Navi was a pivotal point in the story's development. Interesting. So let's see. Miyamoto wanted to make a game that was cinematic yet distinguished from films. Takumi Kawagoe, a cutscene director for Nintendo, said that his priority was to have the player feel in control of the action, promote his instantaneous continuity of cinematic gameplay. The cutscenes in Ocarina of Time are completely generated with real-time computing on the Nintendo 64 and do not use pre-rendered full-motion video. Miyamoto's vision required his real-time architecture for the more than a total of more than 90 cutscenes, regardless of whether the console had a vast medium like CD-ROM on which to store pre-rendered versions. Toru Osawa created the story based on an idea by Miyamoto and Yoshiaki Koizumi. He was supported by A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening scriptwriter Kensuke Tanabe. Miyamoto said the real-time rendering engine allowed his small team to 3 to 7 cinematic developers to rapidly adjust the storyline and to focus on developing additional gameplay elements even up to the final few months of development instead of waiting on a repeated pre-rendering process. Interesting. So some of Miyamoto's ideas were instead used in Super Mario 64 since it was to be released first. Other ideas were not used due to time constraints. A storytelling shopkeeper character named Hobbit that was initially to be cut was eventually repurposed as the Deku Scrubs later in development. Ocarina of Time originally ran on the same engine as Super Mario 64, but was so heavily modified that Miyamoto considers the final products different engines. One major difference between the two is camera control. Compared to that of Mario 64, the camera of Ocarina of Time is much more limited and is largely controlled by the AI. Miyamoto said camera controls for Ocarina of Time are intended to reflect the focus on the game's world, whereas those of Super Mario 64 are centered on the character of Mario. Miyamoto wanted the difficulty level to be accessible to all players, and in particular, he wanted it to be easier than Super Mario 64. Yeah, I mean, it's and again, this is we're still early in 3D gaming, where a lot of companies were still trying to figure out camera controls. Mario 64, I mean, all things considered, right? It's was a pretty good effort, right, for being one of the first 3D platformers, but it's a bit rough. The Legend of Zelda, since the camera sort of follows you, and it's for the most part does a pretty decent job. And so again, right, that these were the first games that were trying to do this. I can only imagine how much brainstorming and trial and error it would have taken, right, to try to perfect this. So I mean, kudos to these guys early on in 3D gaming development, as some of the 3D games of this time had pretty rough camera controls, but they got it they did a pretty decent job though, right, in their first initial outings. But regarding the music, so Ocarina of Time's music was written by Koji Kondo, the composer in charge of music for most Zelda games. In addition to characters having musical themes, areas of Hyrule are also associated with pieces of music. This has been called the leitmotif in reverse. Instead of music announcing an entering character, it now introduces a stationary environment as the player approaches. In some locations, the music is a variation of an ocarina tune the player learns related to that area. So that's clever. I mean, considering that the game has like a music sort of theme to it, right? I mean, with the Ocarina of Time and all. So that's, and yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, that is true. I guess I never really thought about that. I mean, I definitely noticed it playing the game, but just nothing that, I guess, really was at the forefront of my mind. And now the music was done for this game right until I'm reading this here. But beyond providing a background or a backdrop for the setting, music plays an integral role in gameplay. The button layout of the Nintendo 64 controller resembles the holes of the ocarinas in the game, and players must learn to play several songs. All songs are played using the 5 notes available on the ocarina, although by bending pitches via the analog stick, players can play additional tones. Kondo said that creating distinct themes on the limited scale was a major challenge, but feels that the result is very natural. The popularity of Ocarina of Time led to increase in ocarina sales. Interesting, because I mean, the ocarina, I remember when I first heard the name of this game, I was like, what the heck is an ocarina, or ocarina, I think is what I was pronouncing it, right? And so I didn't know what it was until afterwards. I started figuring it out. And so I was like, oh, okay, it's like kind of like a what is it called? Like almost like a harmonica looking thing. But I didn't really know what it was at the time, right? So yeah, I mean, if anything, I didn't buy an ocarina, but it definitely, let me know, introduced me to what it was, I guess. But let's see, the official soundtrack of Ocarina of Time was published by Pony Canyon and released in Japan on December 18th of 1998. It comprised one compact disc with 82 tracks. An American version was also released, although the fewer tracks with different packaging artwork. Many critics praised the music in Ocarina of Time, although IGN was disappointed that the traditional Zelda overworld theme was not included. That's true, right? Yeah, I guess I haven't really thought about that. That is true, right? Yeah, it's not used in it, right? Yeah, I guess I had to stop and think about that for a bit. Okay. In 2001, 3 years after the initial release of Ocarina of Time, GameSpot labeled it as one of the top 10 video game soundtracks. The soundtrack at the time was not released in Europe or Australia. In 2011, however, a 51-track limited edition soundtrack for the 3DS version was available in a free mail out through Club Nintendo offer to owners of the 3DS edition as an incentive to register the product. The original musical theme for the Fire Temple area contained a sample of the Ad Han and was altered in later versions of the game due to Nintendo's policy of not including real religious references in their products. The altered theme simply removed the sample. Yeah, so I remember listening to something on this, and basically it's let me see if I can find it actually. Okay, here we go. So this is the original song here. All right, so there's a bit of a sample of it, which that's the one I'm familiar with. I don't think I've ever really heard this chanting version, so let's give this one a listen. Interesting. I mean, I like both versions. I think that ultimately, considering that they did have to change it, I don't mind the one that ultimately ended up being the one that was most widely used afterwards. But the chanting is kind of cool in it. But, you know, again, due to religious references and all that, Nintendo was definitely those, you know, back in these days here. So, like, I remember, so Legend of Zelda. And then another game that came out in 1998, which is an amazing year actually for video games. I did a retrospective of years in gaming, and that was one of my favorite episodes to go over just because that was just such an incredible year. But another game that came out that year, though, also was Xenogears on the PlayStation, and which had a lot of religious themes in it, a lot of religious, like, inspirations in its storytelling, and there was a lot of things that were censored in that one as well. Or well, that they were gonna censor, but then eventually I think they were still allowed to ultimately release a lot of it. But Nintendo specifically, I remember doing a lot of censoring when it came to like religious themes and whatnot. But okay, let's kind of go on here. Let's see. Okay. So in 1999, a live performance album of 12 orchestrated versions of songs from the game entitled The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time Hyrule Symphony was released in Japan by SM Records Ltd. Excuse me. All arrangements were done by Ryuichi Katsumata. Hero of Time, an orchestral recording of Ocarina of Time score performed by Slovak National Symphony Orchestra was released by video game label Material Collective in 2017. A vinyl version was published by IMBit. It was nominated for the Best Game Music Cover Remix at the 16th Annual Game Audio Network Guild Awards. All right, so then when the game actually released, so Ocarina of Time was shown as a technical and thematic demonstration video at Nintendo's Shoshinaki trade show in December of 1995. Nintendo planned to release Super Mario 64 as a launch game for the Nintendo 64 and later release Ocarina of Time for the 64DD, a disk drive peripheral for the system that was still in development. Problems with performance of the 64DD peripheral to development being moved to disc-to-cartridge media, and thus the game would miss its 1997 holiday release and was delayed into 1998. They planned to follow its release with a 64DD expansion disc. Miyamoto additionally attributed to the delay due to Nintendo prioritizing development efforts to Yoshi's Story after that game missed its planned second quarter release slot, as well as desire to better compete with Banjo-Kazooie. Let's see, through the late 1990s, the Nintendo 64 said it lacked hit first-party games. Nintendo Generation wrote that Nintendo absolutely can't afford another holiday season without a real marquee title. They further wrote that Zelda was one of the most anticipated games of the decade, upon which Nintendo 64 fate depended. Nintendo spent $10 million on Ocarina of Time's marketing. In March of 1998, it was the most anticipated Nintendo 64 game in Japan. Chairman Howard Lincoln insisted at E3 1998 that Zelda ship on time and become Nintendo's reinvigorating blockbuster akin to a hit Hollywood movie. Customers in North America who pre-ordered the Ocarina of Time received a limited edition box with a golden plastic card reading collector's edition. This edition contained a colored gold cartridge, a tradition that began with the original Legend of Zelda in 1986 for the Nintendo Entertainment System, and demand was so great that Electronics Boutique stopped pre-sales on November 3rd of 1998. Wow. Several versions of Ocarina of Time were produced, with later versions featuring minor glitches such as glitch repairs, the recoloring of Ganondorf's blood from crimson to green, and the alteration of the music heard in the Fire Temple dungeon to remove a sample of an Islamic prayer chant, like we just talked about earlier. So the sample was taken from a commercially available sound library, but the developers did not realize it contained Islamic references. Although popularly believed to have been changed due to public outcry, the chanting was removed after Nintendo discovered it violated policy of avoiding religious material, and the altered versions of Ocarina of Time were made prior to the original release. Interesting. Nowadays, that's one of the things that, well, I guess, depending on how you look at it, but back then, if there was a mistake made that was big enough for whatever reason to have it removed or changed, they had to re-release the game, where now they can just patch it out. So in a sense, that's kind of a good thing about patches right now that they can do in video games. But in another sense though, right, once it's patched, and unless you still have the original media and not updating it, then, you can't really get access to that game anymore, or that version anymore, which I still think is important, right, for things we've already talked about, right, earlier in this podcast. But I guess if you're able to find a very early version of Ocarina of Time, you can still find the one that has the chanting in it if you wanted to get that version for any reason. Let's see. So re-releases. So Nintendo re-released Ocarina of Time on its next console, the GameCube, via a bonus disc given to those who pre-ordered The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker in Japan and North America, or included with a limited edition bundle in Europe. The disc included the original game and second, more difficult Master Quest version, marking its first official release. Ocarina of Time was also included in the Legend of Zelda Collector's Edition, a Zelda game compilation for GameCube. The collection was included in GameCube bundles worldwide and given to those who registered certain hardware and software or subscribed to official magazines and clubs. These re-releases are emulations of the original Nintendo 64 version. The emulated ports run at a resolution of 640 by 480, so basically 480p, double that of the original, and supports progressive scan. And I mean, this was a time, right, and all where seeing like older games upscaled and all in progressive scan at least was pretty revolutionary at the time. But in November 2003, Ocarina of Time was ported to the iQue player for a release in China as one of the 5 games available on its release. But yeah, I remember getting that version for the GameCube, the collector's edition. It was a pretty cool thing to have. But in February of 2007, Ocarina of Time was released for the Wii Virtual Console service for 1,000 Wii points. This version is also an emulation of the Nintendo 64 version because this version does not support controller vibration. The Stone of Agony item, which employs vibrations via the Rumble Pack controller accessory, has no function. A 5-minute demo can be unlocked in Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Let's see. Ocarina of Time was released on the Wii U Virtual Console worldwide on July 2nd of 2015. This was including the original controller vibration, or included the original controller vibration. It was also released on the Nintendo Classic service on October 25th of 2021. And so, remakes. So the Nintendo 3DS version. So excuse me. So in June of 2011, Nintendo released Ocarina of Time 3D, a remake of the Nintendo 3DS for the Nintendo 3DS handheld console. It was developed by Nintendo EAD with Grezzo, an independent Japanese studio headed by Koichi Ishii. It includes Master Quest and adds features including touchscreen and gyroscope controls, a boss challenge mode, instructional videos to guide stuck players, and a modified version of the Water Temple with reduced difficulty. And then there's what we just recently saw, right? So the Nintendo Switch 2, which is scheduled to release sometime this year. So Nintendo announced a remake of Ocarina of Time for the Nintendo Switch 2 during Nintendo Direct presentation on June 9th of 2026, with a teaser trailer and a 2026 release year. On June 14th, an unrevealed description for the game was found in the Nintendo of America store page, which promised, quote, stunning visuals, updated designs, and timeless gameplay, unquote. So this led journalists to believe that the new version would have similar gameplay to the original while being a full remake. Oli Wesh of Polygon criticized the lack of content shown in the trailer, but still found the reveal exciting. So yeah, we're still here waiting on that, right? And we'll touch base a little bit more on that here towards the end here. But continuing on here, though, with Ocarina of Time, so the Master Quest, and I've never messed around with this here, but so this kind of started with the original Zelda game. So, and actually, it should be, I should play the Zelda this way, where, so if you don't know, because I remember I thought it was a cool concept back then. Once you beat, I think it's once you beat The Legend of Zelda is when you can get access to this alternate Master Quest. I think it's what it was called back then too. And basically it's a bit of a harder version with the items in different locations and all. And so kind of give it some replayability value, right? If you wanted to beat the game again in a slightly different way, right, from the original. And that started with the first one. And I just remember, even though back then when I was a kid, I never beat the game, but I remember reading about that in magazines and all that. I thought, I was like, oh, that's cool, right? It changes up the game some. I just thought that was a cool concept. Well, that's kind of continued on, right, with some of these Zelda games and, for example, Ocarina of Time. So anyways, to read a bit about this. So after completing Ocarina of Time, Nintendo developed a new version, Ura Zelda, for the 64DD, an add-on that expanded the Nintendo 64 functionality with rewritable magnetic discs and online connectivity. The title Ura Zelda was commonly translated as Another Zelda. It uses the same engine and plot of Ocarina of Time, but with increased difficulty and altered dungeons and puzzles, inspired by the second quest from the original Legend of Zelda. Okay, second quest, that's what it was called. Okay. But it also contains cut content from Ocarina due to time and storage constraints. Miyamoto said no online functions had ever been planned for Ura Zelda. After Ura Zelda was completed, Nintendo chose not to release it due to 64DD's limited distribution. They considered other ways to release it, such as promotions with game magazines, but it was never released for the Nintendo 64 due to the expense of manufacturing cartridges. Well, we kind of learned that lesson, huh, Nintendo? But after the release of the GameCube, which used less expensive optical discs, Ura Zelda was ported to the GameCube in 2002 in Japan as Zerudu no Densutsu Toki no Ocarina GC Ura, and in 2003 in North America and Europe as The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time Master's Quest. According to Miyamoto, Ura Zelda was simple to port as it used a few of the 64DD features. And again, my apologies if I get some of these names in Japanese wrong. It's just I'm kind of horrible at trying to read these names off. Not only just for like Japanese names, but also like other names too. Also, even some English names. I'm just kind of bad with names sometimes. It's funny because at my job with what I do, I have to, well, let's just say make phone calls, right, to people. And so sometimes if I'm making a call out and if I'm leaving a message and I'm trying to pronounce the name of someone, I feel so bad sometimes. I'm like, I'm probably butchering this person's name and they're kind of thinking like, who the hell left me this voicemail? I do my best though. But let's see. But IGN's Pierre Schneider gave Master Quest a mostly positive review, likening the concept to the second quest of the original Legend of Zelda. He said that some redesigned areas were poorer than the original Ocarina of Time and speculated they may have been constructed from second choice designs created during development. He described the port as graphically improved, but containing no substantial improvements to the frame rate, and the controls translated to the GameCube controller felt clumsy. Nonetheless, he summarized Master Quest as a sweet surprise for any Zelda fan, and wrote he would have recommended it even at full price. Zachary Lewis of RPG Gamer praised the revised puzzles, which require precise timing and find new uses of the Ocarina items, but wrote that players would be enthralled or frustrated by the increased difficulty. Yeah, and speaking on the, I don't know if it'll touch base on this a little bit later, but speaking on the controls of this game, it's during the specific, well, I guess you can even say the Wii, right? Or I guess even the Wii U, but for like the Nintendo 64 and the GameCube specifically too, right? But then the Wii and the Wii U also, the games, like a lot of the Nintendo games that were coming out on these systems really benefit from playing on the original controller, because which I can appreciate, because the controllers that were for these systems are a bit unique, right? They weren't kind of more the standardized controllers that we would see with the original Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and then eventually like the PlayStation or the Xbox. And so for that, they really feel like, I mean, they were made for that specific controller. So, for example, Super Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time are probably some of the better examples of this early on from the Nintendo 64 going forward, where Ocarina of Time was really meant to be played on the Nintendo 64 controller, just the layout of the buttons and everything, and even like the on-screen button prompts, right? Reference the buttons on the controller with like the C buttons. It has a very unique setup that it's really best played on that, because once you start getting to like, if you start playing The Legend of Zelda like on a more standard modern controller, I mean, it's doable for sure, but it's a bit awkward though, and so at least at the time, right, and all, it was pretty nice that Nintendo games felt at home on a Nintendo console. I know that sounds obvious, but it's because again their controllers from the Nintendo 64 all the way to the Wii U were very unique to the system, and and some of the games that took advantage of that was pretty cool, right? I mean, I can appreciate that. It's just that when they try to re-release the games and all, and you're playing it on a more standardized controller, it can be kind of awkward. So I've almost been tempted on getting like a Nintendo 64 controller for the Nintendo Switch, so I can have that controller to play some of the Nintendo 64 games on the NSO service. They came out with the official one, which I think you can only get through the Nintendo Store, but my understanding, I think that's kind of hard to get and all. But they've made there's been some other companies that have made, a controller with a similar style that maybe I'll look into one of those. But anyways, let's see, reception. So again, this game is still to this day the highest rated game of all time as far as on Metacritic. So Ocarina of Time received unprecedented critical acclaim. He garnered perfect scores from the majority of reviews, including those in All Game, CVG, Famitsu, Next Generation, Edge, Electronic Gaming Monthly, GameSpot, GamePro, Game Revolution, Nintendo Life, and IGN. The review aggregator website Metacritic and Game Rankings both ranked the original Nintendo 64 version as the highest reviewed game of all time, with average scores of 99 out of 100 on Metacritic and 98% on Game Rankings. The reviews praised multiple aspects, particularly the level design, gameplay, mechanics, sound, and cinematics. GameSpot reviewer Jeff Gertzman wrote, "The Ocarina of Time is a game that can't be called anything other than flawless." And IGN called it the new benchmark for interactive entertainment that could shape the action RPG genre for years to come, which it definitely did. Editors of game trailers called it a walking patent office due to the number of features it contains that became industry standard. Yeah, very true. Like the Z targeting, right? For example, right? That wasn't really like a thing where, nowadays in 3D gaming, if you're trying to attack an enemy, any kind of 3D game that has some sort of like a action gameplay to it, now you have like a targeting feature, right? In a lot of them. That wasn't really a thing back then. It wasn't until the Z targeting kind of came into place. Might someone have figured it out eventually? Sure, but you got to give credit where credit's due. That that the team that made this game, right, and all came up with this concept here. Let's see. And so the graphics were praised for their depth and detail, although reviewers noted they were not always the best on Nintendo 64. Game Revolution noted the characters' faces, the toughest graphical challenge on 3D characters, saying the characters' expressions and animations featured surprising grace. IGN believed that Ocarina of Time's improved on the graphics of Mario 64, giving a larger sense of scale. Impressive draw distances and large boss characters were also mentioned as graphical highlights. Reviewers praised the use of color and the visibility and detail of the environment, but some felt graphical elements did not perform as well as Banjo-Kazooie, a game that released on the same platform earlier that year. IGN said that the frame rate and textures of Ocarina of Time were not as good as those on Banjo-Kazooie, particularly in the marketplace of Hyrule Castle, which was called blurry. Which is true. A lot of Nintendo 64 games had that sort of blurry sort of look to them. But the gameplay was generally praised as detailed, with many side quests to occupy players' times. IGN said that it would be amazed at the detail of the environments and the amount of thought that went into designing it. IGN praised the cinematics, citing great emotional impact and flawless camera work. EGM enjoyed that Nintendo was able to make elements of the older 2D Zelda games and translate it into 3D flawlessly. Nintendo Power cited Ocarina of Time along with Super Mario 64 as the two games that trailblazed into the 3D era. The context-sensitive control system was seen as one of the strongest elements of the gameplay. Reviewers noted that it allowed for simpler control using fewer buttons, but it occasionally caused the player to perform unintended actions. The camera control was quoted as making combat second nature, although the new system took time for players to get used to. The audio was generally well received, with IGN comparing some of Koji Kondo's pieces to the work of Philip Glass. Who's Philip Glass? He's an American composer and pianist. He was widely regarded as one of the most influential composers of the late 20th century. Glass's work has been associated with minimalism, being built up from repetitive phrases and shifting layers. He describes himself as a composer of music with repetitive structures, which he has helped to evolve stylistically. And he composed... Okay, so some of the stuff that he composed. So let's see. Martin Scorsese's Condom, Stephen Daltrey's The Hours, and Richard Ayory's Notes on Scandal. And also Koyanitskatsi, Mishima, A Life of Four Chapters, Hamburger Hill, The Thin Blue Line, Candyman, The Truman Show, and The Illusionist. Okay. That's cool. I didn't know that. Many atmospheric sounds and surround sound were designed to effectively immerse the player in the game world. Some reviewers complained that the audio samples sounded dated. Others considered this a benefit, calling them retro. Game Revolution called the sound good for Nintendo, but not great for the larger scheme of things, and noted that the cartridge format necessitated MIDI tunes that ranged from fair to terrible. Pitchfork gave the soundtrack album a 9 out of 10. So yeah, I mean, as far as the music goes, it's I like the soundtrack. It's very catchy. It goes really well with the game. And then also, like I said, right, how they were able to implement some of the levels or the areas tunes into like a melody that you can play on the Ocarina of Time was pretty, it was pretty genius. But the actual like quality of the music, I mean, it wasn't quite like what CD music was at the time. And what I remember is when I played this game, and that's because in the 5th generation, this was the first generation where we were really being exposed to like CD quality music, right, with the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn. So, not all games, but a lot of games feature like Red Book audio. And so, whatever we would get, CD quality music, right? And so I would say that when I played The Legend of Zelda, yeah, I could tell that it was more video game sounding music, right? Because the Nintendo 64 obviously couldn't do CD quality music, but I certainly didn't mind it as well too, right? The music was catchy, it was kind of in the background, but definitely not annoying, went really well with the game. And so in that sense, I guess no real complaints with the music, right? Again, I find it to be a good soundtrack overall for how it fits the game on its own. Probably not something I would listen to outside of the game, but it definitely goes well with the game, right? If that makes any sense. But sales, though, so assisted by a large marketing campaign, Ocarina of Time was a commercial success. In the United States, over 500,000 pre-orders were placed, more than tripling the number of pre-orders of any previous game. Wow. For which it was awarded the Guinness World Record for most advanced orders of a game. Upon release, more than 1 million copies were sold in less than a week. In 1998, 2.5 million copies were sold, although it was released only 39 days before the end of the year. It earned $150 million, equivalent to $300 million in 2025 in U.S. revenues, higher than any Hollywood film in the last 6 weeks of 1998. Video games were starting to become a big deal. And so in the United States, it was the best-selling video game of 1998 in dollar sales and the second best-selling game in unit sales behind GoldenEye 007. In Japan, 920,000 copies were sold in 1998, becoming the 8th best-selling game of that year. A reported 386,234 copies were sold in the first week there, surpassing the 316 first week sales of Metal Gear Solid. Fuck, man, Metal Gear Solid and Ocarina of Time like coming out back to back almost, and then Xenogears as well too. Fuck, but 1998 was an amazing year. But in Europe, Ocarina of Time was the best-selling game of 1998, grossing more than 39 million yen. I'm sorry, not yen, euros, or 44 million US dollars, equivalent to 87 million in 2025. In the UK, it was the fastest-selling game until the release of Gran Turismo 2 in 2000, selling 61,232 copies during its first week. 1.14 million Nintendo 64 copies were sold in Japan and 7.6 million copies worldwide. By 2000, Ocarina of Time had sold 7 million cartridges and grossed about 400 million, equivalent to 790 million in 2025 worldwide. Awards. So in 1998, Ocarina of Time won the grand prize in the Interactive Art Division at the Japanese Media Arts Festival. Ocarina of Time won 6 awards at the second annual Interactive Achievement Awards: Game of the Year, Console Game of the Year, Console Adventure Game of the Year, Console Role-Playing Game of the Year, Outstanding Achievement in Interactive Design, and Outstanding Achievement in Software Engineering. It also received a nomination for Outstanding Achievement in Character or Story Development. At the BAFTA Interactive Entertainment Awards, Ocarina of Time won in 4 categories: the Best Game Award, precursor to the British Academy's Best Game Award, Innovative Game Award, the Interactivity Award, and the Computer Programming Award. Electronic Gaming Monthly gave it both the Editor's Choice and Reader's Choice Awards for the Game of the Year for all systems, Nintendo 64 Game of the Year, and Action RPG of the Year, as well as the Reader's Choice for Best Music and Best Graphics, and it was runner-up for the Reader's Choice Best Sound Effects Award. Edge gave it the award for Game of the Year and Gameplay Innovation, and placed it second place for Graphical Achievement behind Virtua Fighter 3 TV. So the legacy of this game. After publication, Ocarina of Time was featured on a number of compiled lists of best or most influential games. It was ranked the greatest video game of all time by numerous publications, including Computer and Video Games, Edge, Entertainment Weekly, Game Trailers, IGN, Next Generation, Nintendo Power, of course Nintendo Power, Game Informer, Slant, FHM, and Palgan, or PALGN. It also appeared on lists of greatest games, including those of Electronic Gaming Monthly and IGN. It was placed second in official Nintendo magazine's 100 greatest Nintendo games of all time, behind only Super Mario Bros. Game Informer ranked it as its 11th favorite game of all time and described it as untouchable. In May of 2011, IGN held a tournament-style competition celebrating the 25th anniversary of the original Legend of Zelda series, in which fans voted Ocarina of Time the greatest Zelda game. It beat Majora's Mask in the final round. Ocarina of Time has consistently been placed at number one in IGN's top 100 games list, a staff-voted list in January 2000, a staff and reader voted list in July 2007, a list of 100 best games to play today in March of 2009, and a 2013's readers poll selecting the 20 best games released since the magazine's launch in 1993. Edge concluded its 2009 list with Ocarina of Time is here in the list not because Nintendo has the power and wisdom to make a great game, but because it has the courage to make a unique one. In 2009, Guinness World Records ranked the game 5th on their list of the top 50 console games of all time based on initial impact and impacting legacy. In 2022, the Strong National Museum of Play inducted Ocarina of Time to its World Video Game Hall of Fame. Reception for Master Quest and Virtual Console releases was positive, while some considered aspects of the game and audio to be outdated. Most thought that the game had aged well. The Master Quest version holds an average score of 89.50 on Game Rankings and 91 out of 100 on Metacritic. IGN said that in their review that Ocarina of Time has aged extremely well, and noted in regard to the graphics, while the textures and models look dated, the visual presentation stood the test of time. Game Revolution said that although it had noticeably aged compared to brand new RPGs, it's still a terrific game, awarding 91 out of 100. In 2007, former GameSpot editor Jeff Gerstmann gave the Virtual Console port 8.9 out of 10. Even after 9 years, Ocarina of Time holds up surprisingly well, offering a lengthy and often amazing adventure. In November of 2021, enthusiasts fully decompiled Ocarina of Time's ROM into human-readable C code. In March of 2022, a group called Harbor Masters publicly released a port under the name Ship of Harkanian, which I'll get into that here in a bit, but which includes widescreen support and increased frame rate along other features. So the overall impact. So again, a lot of crazy things, right, were sort of started with Ocarina of Time, that so many games that have come out since, right, you can appreciate a lot of the things that were, that again took inspiration from Ocarina of Time. So like Ocarina of Time popularized features such as a target lock-on system and context-sensitive buttons that have since become common elements in 3D adventure games. It also credited with increasing the popularity of the Ocarina. So multiple members of the video game industry have expressed how the game influenced them from the industry. Former Rockstar Games vice president creator Dan Houser stated in 2012 that anyone who makes 3D games who say they're not borrowing something from Mario or Zelda on the Nintendo 64 is lying. Rockstar founder and Grand Theft Auto director Sam Houser described Grand Theft Auto 3 as Zelda meets Goodfellas. There you go. Zelda meets Goodfellas. Okami director Hideki Kamiya, so he's from Capcom and Platinum Games, so said that he has been influenced by Zelda when he developed Okami, Okami is very much a Zelda-inspired game. So if you're looking for that kind of like more traditional Zelda gameplay, you have a hub world, you find power-ups, you go through some kind of a dungeon, fight a boss kind of formula. And if you've never played Okami, definitely check that game out. But Soul Reaver and Uncharted director Amy Hennig from Crystal Dynamics and Naughty Dog cited Zelda as an influence for the Legacy of Kain series, noting Ocarina of Time's influence on Soul Reaver. Oh yeah, Soul Reaver also definitely has some Ocarina of Time elements to it. Dark Souls creator Hidetaka Miyazaki, so from Software, said that The Legend of Zelda became a sort of textbook for 3D action games. Ico director Fumito Ueda from Team Ico cited Zelda as an influence on Shadow of the Colossus. Darksiders director David Adams from Vigil Games cited Zelda as an influence on his work. And yeah, very much. Darksiders is another game too also that, again, if you like that kind of more old school 3D Zelda style, Darksiders is another excellent game. But CD Projekt Red, The Witcher 3, and Cyberpunk 2077 cited Zelda as an influence on the Witcher series, including The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, and Final Fantasy and the Third Birthday director Hajime Tabata from Square Enix cited Ocarina of Time as an inspiration for the seamless open world of Final Fantasy 15. So there you go, right? So much praise on this game, so much love for this game. I mean, it's truly just a work of art. It's highly influential. There's just so much about this game, right? That just the inspirations that the video game industry took from this game is truly unprecedented. And I mean, it's the game just truly stands tall, right? It's, for me personally, I mean, I think I've said it before, right? Where it's like the sense of adventure that you go on this game, right? Again, you start off in this small little village. Eventually, it grows out to where you're exploring this vast land, at least at the time, right? And the each area, right, that's very unique unto itself. You know, you got the Gorons in the Death Valley Mountain area, and then the Lake Hylia, and then the Zoras. And then the Gerudos in the desert levels and all, which all would become staples, right, and all going forward in the Zelda series. But each area is very unique unto itself. The dungeon layouts on this is definitely some of the funnest, right, where it's a combination of like puzzle solving, great setting, action gameplay also, the clever use of items, and just this overall sense of feeling like you're inhabiting in this world that just truly makes this game a standout. And I've said before that the story is nothing too crazy on it, but that also I think works to its benefit, that you just feel like you're on this very charming, fun-filled adventure, which does have a sense of darkness to it though and all, right? But still, at the end of the day, it's a very feel-good adventure. Some of the things that Nintendo has always been really good at doing that. And for me, as far as that goes there, this is definitely one of their best games of all time for that. I mean, this is why this game is just so highly praised. And for me personally, when I first played this game, so again, the game came out in 1998, and at the time we had the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation, and I didn't get the Nintendo 64 until the following year in 1999. Was it 1999 actually? Yes. Yeah, it was 1999. And so what I remember was, so I had moved out, and so I was living in a city with some roommates. And so we had the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation hooked up. But at the time, right, I kept hearing about The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, that it was one of the greatest games of all time. And also, and again, I'm getting to the point now where I really wanted to expand out more, getting, games on other systems instead of just Sega and then, well, eventually Sony's PlayStation. And so... And it was around, because then we got the Sega Dreamcast, and that was great. But we had moved again, and I ended up living in this apartment with some roommates, and so I just had my little TV in my room, as in the living room. Usually the TV that we had there, where we had the Saturn and the Dreamcast and the PlayStation, were kind of, my roommates were usually using. So I wanted to find the game that I could play, where I could just play in my room, right, when I'm just kind of hanging out on my own. And so then I remember I went to like this consignment store, and I found the Nintendo 64 there for cheap, along with Ocarina of Time. So I was like, oh, well, shit, I'm going to buy this. And so I got it. And so I remember just kind of playing that game quite a bit in my room there. Yeah, it was truly a great experience, just, being lost in this world. I was kind of going through a bit of a rough time during that stretch there, and so it was just sort of a way for me to kind of, and, when I say escape reality, I've been always someone that's been pretty grounded, I feel, in life. But, there's times, right, where you have to sort of like find a bit of escapism, right, when we're going through kind of a rough period. And so this game really helped me out. just a little bit about myself. So during this stretch here, I was dealing with a lot of anxiety, and I was getting a lot of panic attacks and all. And I don't know, this could be a combination. I was 19 years old at the time. I had moved from a small town to a big, well, I guess you can say not big city, but a bigger city. And so there was a lot of changes, just going through a lot of growing pains for a lot of different things. And so it just filled me with a lot of anxiety. And it was kind of a rough stretch there where I remember going to work and just having these crazy panic attacks. And so just having to, go home sick, quote unquote sick, and kind of feeling guilty about that and all, because I wasn't quite sure how to deal with these panic attacks that I was getting. Eventually, I was able to overcome it. And one of the things that really helped me through this, at least to kind of ground me a bit, was video games. And so during the stretch here, because this is right during the height of when I was getting a lot of panic attacks, I remember one of the things that would bring me a lot of comfort was just coming home, and I would just kind of need to unwind a bit. So I would go into my room and just play The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64. And I was playing it on the small little Magnavox 13-inch TV. It's a CRT TV. So I remember that there. And outside of it just being a really great game, I credit this game a lot to also for being able to sort of get me through a bit of a rough patch there. And as again, I was just able to sort of take my mind off of things and, try to center me some. And so, yeah, for that reason, this game holds a special place for me. Not only this game, but a bunch of other games too. But like the reason I remember this adventure on the is again, we had the other systems plugged in on the living room, and so usually when I would play those games, it was kind of rare at the time, just because again there was always people around, and so the Ocarina of Time was a game that I could kind of play more isolated, right, where I can focus on the game more instead of trying to play a game right in the living room when everyone else is looking. So usually when we would play games in the living room, it was something that was like either multiplayer or just something that everybody didn't mind seeing, where the people that I was with, I don't think they would have liked me playing, or they would have been entertained, right, like we playing Ocarina of Time, because again back then we were playing like Soul Calibur and Gran Turismo, right? Those were like the games that were pretty popular, or the House of the Dead too. So yeah, like I said, that was sort of like my moment with that game that I could enjoy on my own, and so I have a lot of fond memories for that because of that. But the game hasn't aged completely well, right, in a lot of aspects. And I mean, I think it still holds up pretty well, but, there are certain things about it that, hasn't quite aged as well. But, for as much as I played it back then, though, I never actually beat the game. I got pretty far into it when I was, there, when I would play the game in my room in those days that I just mentioned. But I never actually beat it. I think I got up to the point where I remember being kind of stuck in the Gerudo Village area. So like that one maze in the Thieves dungeon, I forgot what it's called. But I got a little ways into it, but never actually beat it. And then I remember getting the version on the GameCube. Never beat that version though. And then I remember buying it on the Wii Virtual Console, and I got kind of far into it again, but I never quite beat it then. So I remember when it finally came out on the Nintendo Switch Online in 2021, I was like, okay, I need to sit down and beat this game. And so I did, right? And so finally beat the game, and that was the first time I beat it. So that would have really been, like 5 years ago or so since I beat the game. And yeah, I fell in love with it. It was really great. And since then, I've played the 3DS port, which is actually a really great port. I think that's a great way to play that game, if you don't mind that it's, on a small handheld. But it makes a lot of improvements, though. And so, for example, like the Water Temple. Now, I've praised the dungeon design a lot. And the Water Temple, it's actually really well designed. It is, right? Once you kind of figure out what to do in it, it's pretty clever. But it can be kind of frustrating, no doubt. And part of the frustration on that just comes with knowing when to equip your iron boots and whatnot. And so then the other part of that is that in the original version, you have to go into the menu screen, unequip him, and then go back into equip him and so forth, right? Because you got to do that fairly frequently throughout that dungeon. The 3DS version makes it a bit simpler, where you can assign the iron boots to like a button on the second screen that you can just touch on, right, to unequip or equip it a lot faster. So it streamlines it a bit more, right, which is very much appreciated. But yeah, that version is pretty cool though, and the graphics, so the original one ran on 5th generation hardware. You can kind of look at like the 3DS version running on like 6th generation hardware. So not a huge graphical leap, but it definitely looks nicer. Having said that, though, while I do appreciate the graphics in that one and all, and overall it does look better, the colors usage on the game though is really brightened up. And so because of that, it gives it a bit more of a cartoony look to it than what the original had. Meaning that some of the atmosphere is a bit lost, right, in the 3DS version. I still prefer graphically that version, but again, there is a bit of atmosphere that is lost in it. A lot of people complain, for example, like the final boss fight, right? That a lot of people feel that the Nintendo 64 version was just more atmospheric because of that there. But another great way to play this game, and the way I've been kind of going through it again now, is I mentioned earlier the Ship of Arcanian port. And so let's read a bit about this, right? Because I really enjoy this. This is really cool. So the Ship of Arcanian is an unofficial source available port of the 1998 Nintendo 64 video game, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, that runs on Windows, Linux, Mac OS. Oh wow, it runs on the Wii U? Interesting. Android and the Nintendo Switch. Oh, okay. So the port was developed by a group of community developers named Harbor Masters. It was first released in March 2022 for Windows, 4 months after Ocarina of Time source code was decompiled and released. Since then, Ship of Arcanian has received multiple ports to Linux and Mac OS, and homebrew ports to the Wii U and Nintendo Switch. Updates to Ship of Arcanian have attracted media attention, as they often integrate options and features that aren't present in any official release of Ocarina of Time. Harbor Masters have subsequently ported other Nintendo 64 games to Windows. The title of the project is an allusion to the philosophical thought experiment Ship of Thesis, as well as the name of the king of the Legend of Zelda CDI games, who was infamous for the internet meme spawn from video games. But yeah, definitely check this out. It's not too hard to get all set up. And so basically, yeah, so maybe I'll touch base on this one of these days, but there's been a lot of games that have been recompiled. And so my understanding what that means is that when they're able to basically hack a game, and so once they're able to do that, then they can implement a lot of cool changes to it, right? Like for example, with the Ocarina of Time, where you can add widescreen support, increase the frame rate, mod the game in a lot of cool ways and all. And so the way I like playing this version is where, again, it's widescreen support running at 60 frames per second, but there's also some mods you can include. And one that I've been using is one that it adds like some textures that are similar to like the 3DS version of the game. Not quite as graphically as impressive as the 3DS game as far as like the textures go and all, but an improvement in my opinion over what the Nintendo 64 was doing. So it's kind of like a nice in between. And it looks really nice, and it plays amazing. And you can also fix a lot of like the things, like one of the main complaints that I had about the Nintendo 64 version was the text, because there's times where the text goes really slow and then you're getting a lot of like dialogue. And so this makes it a lot more snappier. And you can do a lot of like quality of life improvements. I don't even, probably one of the funnier ones is, so the King Zora, when he's moving really slowly, right, as he's creating an opening where you can continue going forward, he moves super slow in the Nintendo 64 version. You can increase the speed on that in this one here. So a lot of great stuff. If you don't know anything about it, Google it, check it out. For reference, I have this downloaded, this version downloaded on my Odin 2, Retroid Pocket 4, and also on my Steam Deck, right? So it's pretty versatile on all the different kind of systems you can play it on. And yeah, a very fun way to play this game here. So yeah, that's for versions that are out right now. And so again, we're highly anticipating the Ocarina of Time remake here that's scheduled to come out sometime this year. So I've been talking about this on my podcast, in the previous episodes, on how when we're expecting to see more of this game. So I just talked about it earlier, right, in this episode here, where according to Nash Weedle and all, it's probably, we may have to wait until September, when Nintendo usually does some kind of a direct, which kind of seems to make sense, right? I mean, that's usually when Nintendo does things. And I'm assuming that they may want to try to promote this game alongside the movie, because they'll probably want to do like some kind of like a big 40th anniversary for Zelda. And so that's the expectation, right? Is that's when it's going to come out. A lot of people have been also kind of thinking in August, because that's sort of an open slate for Nintendo to announce some things. So then the question is, are they going to do like a Zelda or an Ocarina of Time specific direct, or even a Zelda anniversary direct, or are they going to do it in a general direct with a segment for Zelda? right? Either way, I would say that by sometime in September, we should know more about this remake. It's been a bit frustrating that Nintendo didn't really show us much. I mean, because if it is coming out this year, it definitely prime time, right, to start showing it off. And so then the question is also, what kind of a remake is it going to be? Is it going to be like a full-fledged remake? Is it going to be something that's maybe more of a one-on-one? So basically, are we looking at like an extreme remake, like let's say Final Fantasy VII to the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy, which that really changed things up a lot? Or is it going to be more in line with like a remake for sure, but not too drastically different? So kind of think Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 2 Remake, right? Or is it going to be kind of more of a one-on-one remake with improved graphics and all kind of? So kind of think like the new Star Fox game that just came out compared to its Star Fox 64. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I'm kind of leaning more towards it's going to be somewhere in between Star Fox and the Resident Evil 2 remakes, kind of somewhere in between there. And but definitely excited for it. I mean, it's. I would say that as long as they keep the spirit of the original alive with a lot of cool improvements, I'll personally be satisfied with it, right? And so as great as the game is, there's definitely room for improvement on it. And so if they can really just clean up the game in a lot of ways, improve some of the weaker points of the game, and bring it up to like modern standards, then this game could be considered probably one of the better games for me of all time if it's done right. I know it's a remake. A lot of complaints about remakes being done nowadays, but I'm sort of in my nostalgic era right now where I'm actually kind of appreciating remakes for that reason there. And so if they can do this game right, it's one of the greatest games of all time and one of my personal favorite games of all time. I have it ranked as my 10th favorite ever. Then I'll be pleasantly surprised with it, and really looking forward to see what they do with that. But that's what I got here for the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Hopefully you found some of this information, to be either new to you or you've got some information on this. I mean, if you're a Zelda fan, I'm sure you know so much about this game already. So anything that I had to say here and all is probably basic information. But at the very least, hopefully that gave you a little bit of a nostalgic trip down memory lane. And so just wanted to pay homage here to what's considered, again, right, one of the greatest video games of all time. But next week, assuming if I'm still on schedule, my plan is to do a podcast here for a game that I feel really brought us into the 6th generation. And that is for Soul Calibur on the Sega Dreamcast. I feel that this game, and this is going to be more specifically to the home port for the Sega Dreamcast, although I will be talking about also the arcade version. And I just feel that this is the game that, for those of us that played it back then, was truly incredible. It's also still one of the highest ranking games on Metacritic. And as I think that when this game came out, for those of us that played it on the Dreamcast, it was truly mind-blowing what we were seeing as we were looking into the future with it, and definitely still holds up as a really great fighting game as well too. So we'll get into that game hopefully next week. But until then, hopefully you have an amazing week and take care of yourselves, and we will see you in the next one. Have a good one.